Chapter 609. A few minutes later, Dake walked out of the contestant passageway. He walked into the ring and glanced at Jimmy Abbott, who was surrounded by the students of the House of Fools, and couldn't help but smile. The warm scene of the teenagers comforting and supporting each other was like a painting. Dake, what are you laughing at? I'm laughing at how much you can eat. Wow. Since today's duel was over, Dake didn't stay in the duel hall for too long. After talking to Deanna and Luo C, he left the duel hall and went straight to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. He entered Traveler's Street through the pavilion's teleportation hub. Even though the battle in the duel hall was intense, the liveliness in Traveler's Street was not taken away at all. Dake walked in the bustling crowd and casually summoned a few magic elves to follow him. Then he strolled forward as if he was shopping. He planned to start refining the rhino horn in the next 2 days, so today's plan included buying the relevant materials. He remembered the URL, VIP along the way. Whenever he saw a senior brother or sister hawking materials, he would take a look and buy some materials that were of a suitable price. In the end, as he bought, he accidentally bought a little too much. When he arrived at the Citizen Duel Club shop, the lion beast was already covered with bags of various sizes. Looks like business is good. Dake stopped outside the shop and looked at the flow of people in the shop. The advertising effect of yesterday's exhibition match was gradually showing. More and more students were buying the duel plates in the shop. Eve and Irene had a clear division of labor. One was in charge of sales, and the other was in charge of bookkeeping. They were extremely busy. Dake's original purpose of coming to the shop was to observe the advertising effect of the exhibition match. Now that he could see it at a glance, he naturally didn't need to go in and ask. Therefore, he observed for a while outside, and made sure that it wasn't a temporary success before leaving in satisfaction. After that, he focused on collecting materials. He only went into the cat plant shop when he passed by and spent the rest of his time searching and collecting materials. When he finally bought all the materials, it was already dinner time. Dake happened to be passing by a restaurant, so he decided to have dinner with the magic guide fairies there. After returning to his dormitory, he called Meow Meow over to process the newly purchased materials. After the materials were processed, he took out the rhino horn and soaked it in water before continuing to read. He spent the entire night looking at it. The next morning, Dake woke up early and started experimenting. The duel with AI Ma Métis was scheduled for the 8th match this afternoon. Because there were multiple sessions to be held at the same time, the time schedule was actually relatively early. But after all, it was an afternoon session. Therefore, Dake still had plenty of time to experiment before that. He first flipped to the page of the beast horn from the 3,000 items, 8,000 training methods. Then he started to make the softening agent, according to the refining method of the beast horn. How to adjust the beast horn's softening agent to the extent that the rhino horn could be used was a difficult technical job. Although Dake had made a more complete deduction last night, it still took more time than expected to start the experiment. When he finally made the softening agent that could be used, it was already close to 10 o'clock. He exhaled slightly, took the rhino horn out of the soaking liquid, and put it into the softening agent. As time passed slowly, the surface of the rhino horn gradually became blurred. The whole process of softening took 1 to 2 hours. Dark quickly concocted a magic potion that could be used as ink, and poured it into the axis of the magic pen. He then began to write the magic language. Although he had the refining method of the beast horn eye as a template, there was still a problem during the testing phase after the magic guide language was written. However, Dake did not become anxious because of this. He dealt with it calmly and quickly made adjustments. Relying on his high level of mastery of the magic guide language, he completed the fine-tuning of the magic guide language within an hour and successfully adjusted the surface of the blank magic guide card to a suitable state. After that, he confirmed the progress of the rhino horn's softening and began to speed up the refining process. After failing twice and wasting a lot of materials, Dake finally pushed the process to the final step in the third refining experiment. However, looking at the ocean refining formation that was slowly unfolding on the upper layer of the magic guide card, he did not dare to relax at all. His expression was quite serious. Magical refining experiments could not be relaxed until the very last moment. The higher the precision of the experiment, the more so it was. In the end, a millimeter error could cause the experiment to deviate to an unimaginable degree. Moreover, in the process of refining materials, there were many variables to begin with. He first took the rhino horn out of the softening agent and carefully set it up so that the remaining mucus on the softening agent would naturally slide off the surface until the mucus was no longer there. Then, according to the pre-designed formula, he placed the materials one by one into the ocean refining formation. Among the basic materials, some of them would amplify the effect of the roar, allowing the rhino horn to gain more lethality after refining. The other part was based on the beast horn, which had the power to stimulate the beast and make it excited. The so-called beast horn was originally a magical tool that could stimulate the beast after being blown, causing the beast to be strengthened in excitement and rage. Dake's rhino horn was made using the horn of the roaring rhino as the raw material. Other than the deafening sound after being blown, the rhino horn did not have any basic effects in this area. However, if it was modified according to the refining method of the beast horn, there might be an additional corresponding effect. Dake's goal was to give the rhino horn a similar effect. It would be best if it could strengthen the attacks of the birds and beasts, so that it could be paired with the zoo. For this, he purposely drew 2 points of fury last night. Although he had not done any special research on fury, he had already guessed the nature of fury, to a certain extent through his research on the other 3 major sins. If it was possible, he hoped that he would only use 1 point of fury, and keep the other as research material. At least he wanted to make one fury eye. However, reality always liked to sing an opposite tune to one's dreams. When he put 1 point of fury into the refining formation, he immediately realized that 1 point was not enough. In the light formation that was rippling like a sea of light, the rhino horn that was placed inside was sinking bit by bit. That drop of fury was like a spark that ignited oil. The ocean silence refining array that was floating slowly suddenly started to boil. The light that was released from the refining formation became abnormally strong, but it was flickering. In an instant, the rhino horn was swallowed up until only the tip was left. Dake held the magic brain pipette and frowned. 1 drop was not enough. At least 1 more drop. Maybe 2 drops were not enough. But that was all he had. To put it in or not. This was actually not a problem. No one would be able to resist the urge to throw in the last one after putting in 99 strengthening stones. Dake sucked out the second drop of fury from the thinking bottle and dripped it into the ocean refining formation. This last drop of fury caused the light released by the entire refining formation to reach its peak. The rhino horn was immediately swallowed up. The clock on the wall was already pointing to noon. Dake put down the magic brain pipette. After focusing for a while, he felt a little tired. The blue ribbon at the end poked out from behind him. The considerate little cotton-padded jacket reluctantly delivered a bottle of milk to him. Dake took a sip of the milk and patiently waited for the magic card's reaction to end. 5 minutes later, the magic card stopped reacting and emitted a faint halo of light. Dake used a small knife to remove the black sticky substance on the surface of the magic card, revealing the surface of the card. On the surface of the card, a horn that was no different from the rhino horn was floating in the middle. However, on the surface of this horn, there was an orange-red light. This light color did not belong to the rhino horn, which made Dake think of fury. The color of fury, is it orange-red? Dake could not help but ponder. It's a color that matches it very well. Then the corresponding star of fury. Could it be Mars? Pride is the sun, bliss is the moon, greed is Saturn, envy is Mercury. If fury is Mars, then sloth is Jupiter? Refining the emerald holy sword requires sloth? Dake thought carefully and felt that something was wrong. However, he could not tell what was wrong. It was that inexplicable feeling. Maybe I should think of a way to increase fury by 2 points. 2 points may not be enough, at least fury 2 can reveal the emblem. Dake shook his head, picked up the milk on the table and drank it in 1 gulp. Since he had already begun his research, if he did not figure it out, his thoughts would not be clear. Let's see if this item card is refined or not. If it was not refined, it would be a success. If the effect of this item card did not match the value of 2 points of fury, then it would be a failure. After Dake washed it clean and brought it in front of him, he suddenly made a sound of surprise. He did not see it clearly because of the filth. Now that he took a closer look, he suddenly realized that there was a thin and long crack at the horn. Why is it cracked? Dake could not help but frown. However, he immediately shook his head. For an item card, the item summoned was a projection anyway. Therefore, whether there was a crack or not was not the key. Moreover, if only the horn was cracked, it would not affect the sound of the horn. Let's inject magic first and see. Dake cautiously injected some magic, then slowly increased it and gradually received feedback. From the feedback of the magic card flowed into his brain. He roughly knew the name and effect of this item card. Card name, Warhorn type, item card, effect, Fury +2 ultimate skill, War Roar. War Roar, stimulate the fighting spirit of allies, filling their entire body with the power of fury. All attacks +300. War Roar frightens the enemy and has a probability of causing them to cower. War Roar is deafening like thunder, causing varying degrees of damage to the enemy within the sound's transmission range. The maximum damage is 1/3 of the player's attack. Fury +2? Dake's hand trembled, and he almost threw the item card away. No wonder after injecting magic, I feel restless in my chest when I hold it in my hand. If I summon this war horn, I'm afraid that before I blow it, I would have already raised my head. The human heart was impetuous, and it was not difficult to increase fury. The difficult part was that it was easy to lose control. Therefore, the war horn's Fury +2 effect did not have much practical use, unless it was paired with a magic wand like the god's fury, which could turn the anger into magic. But I do need a few points of fury to do research. Dake called out the list and looked at it. Fury did not increase after October, and after drawing 2 points, there were still 90 points left. 90 points of fury was just below the level where it could not be drawn. Therefore, he immediately began to summon. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the war horn. An orange-red light shone through the surface of the card, and a rough-looking horn that was mainly black gradually condensed in the light. Dake raised his spirits and reached out to grab the horn. At that moment, the restlessness in his chest increased, as if there was a breath that could not be released no matter what. The anger continued to rise. Dake's expression changed and he hurriedly let go. Before the war horn fell to the ground, it was caught by Fairy Ibu with a ribbon. The expression on Dark's face quickly calmed down. Then, he looked at the horn that was wrapped in the ribbon with a strange expression. When the horn left his hand, he suddenly felt the anger in his chest leak out. Not only did the anger not continue to rise, it suddenly disappeared because there was an outlet to vent it, and his whole body felt refreshed. Even though this wouldn't decrease Fury's power, it unexpectedly stopped Fury from increasing. Could it be that using this thing can effectively control Fury's gradual increase? Dake thought, and suddenly looked up at the clock on the wall, and hurriedly began to tidy up the remnants of the experiment. I'll try it when I get back. Tidying up, eating and hurrying. When Dake finally arrived at the outdoor dueling arena, it was already 1 in the afternoon. Almost as soon as he stepped into the dueling hall, he heard the notification of the branch card. He took out the campus card, and as expected, it was a notification for the competition. The 8th match in the afternoon. The opponent is AI Mametis. Dake directly turned into the contestants' passage and quickly advanced. When he reached the exit on the other side of the passage, he took out his card bag and made some minor adjustments to the deck that he had built yesterday. To put it simply, he added the war horn. Although he had not yet tried blowing it, the feedback from the war horn was actually very clear. War Roar, which could be used on all allies, had turned it into an extremely versatile magic card. In particular, its attack bonus was not weak at 300 points. It could be said that it was the standard value of a weapon card's attack bonus. Compared to the sickle/dagger's attack bonus of 200 points, the war horn was undoubtedly much better. The only thing to pay attention to was the duration of the war roar. However, this was generally not a problem in a magic duel. Coupled with the zoo, a short-term mass summoning, it could achieve the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. As for the cowering effect that made people fearful, Dake did not comment on this kind of issue that involved probability. On the contrary, the overall damage of 1/3 of the attack was very useful in certain periods of time, especially in a war. If this war horn was given to a magic elf with 6,000 high merit points to use, it could harvest the first tier of the enemy's army like cutting grass. This was a real war-killing weapon. Are you adjusting the deck? The sudden voice behind his ear made his expression turn sluggish. He calmly folded the magic card and put it into the card bag. Maintaining a smile, he turned around and said, "Good afternoon, Miss AI Ma." The corners of AI Ma's eyes turned up slightly. She quickly walked past him and muttered, "Don't underestimate me." Dake was a little embarrassed. He knew that this was obviously for him to hear. Building the deck at this time was like cramming before an exam. It was disrespectful to the opponent in the duel. "I made her angry." Dake shook his head and quickly followed. AI Ma was still so sensitive. Following the appearance of the two contestants outside the duel arena, the second-year students in the ring suddenly became lively. Dake Dimming versus AI Ma Métis. The attention this pair received was clearly higher than yesterday. As the top two second-year students of the two academies, they would be noticed even if they were walking on the streets. The second-year students of the Knights Academy and the Nobles Academy were led by their respective leaders to face off against each other. The students of the Nobles Academy were all full of confidence. They were certain that the Nobles Academy would win this confrontation. Although the students of the Knights Academy were louder, their words were clearly fierce on the outside but weak on the inside. Although they had high hopes for their Miss Know-It-All, if the opponent was Dake Dimming, their chances were slim. During the opening ceremony on Friday, the duel between Dake Dimming and the second-year top student of the Magic Academy, Saraswati, had already made them gasp in amazement. Sarah's strength had clearly far surpassed that of a normal second-year student, but Dake Dimming had still won so easily. The layers of comparison made people unable to muster up any courage to challenge him. Therefore, the fact that Jimmy Abbott was able to walk onto the duel stage yesterday and calmly face off with Sarah had already made some people sit up and take notice. The students of the Knights Academy all acknowledged AI Ma's strength, but they only regarded her as an existence on the same level as Sarah. In the previous second-year students, whether it was AI Ma or Sarah, they were both worthy of being called shining stars. However, in this year's second-year students, there was someone who was one level higher. If AI Ma and Sarah had the strength of a third-year student in the second year, then Dake Dimming was someone who had the strength of a fourth-year student. The difficulty of one level was 10. The difficulty of 2 levels was 100. With such thoughts in mind, the second-year students looked at the duel arena. At this time, both contestants had already stepped onto the stage. Dake Dimming was on the red side. AI Ma Métis was on the blue side. Adhering to the habit of being taciturn, the two of them did not say a word during the preparation stage, exchange segment. As the two sides put the prepared cards into the card slots, the duel that had attracted a lot of attention finally began. The sound of the automatic shuffling echoed in his ears, and Dake gradually focused his attention. This duel didn't have much meaning to him, but he would take every duel seriously and win every victory, until the real powerhouse appeared in front of him. He was looking forward to next month's Golden Cup. Unlike him, AI Ma was already fully focused at this moment. She had already decided to go all out. In order to understand Dake's deck, she also watched the duel between Dake and Jimmy yesterday afternoon. Unfortunately, Jimmy was too useless and did not draw out Dake's new system at all. For the time being, she could only calculate based on Dake's past duels, and then simulate the situation in her mind to try to find a way to win. But even if it was just her imagination, she did not win a single time. Even if she had a huge advantage in the early stages, in the later stages, she would be overturned by low HP. Dake Dimming's deck had such tenacity. The more AI Ma thought about it, the more she realized that Dake was already at a height that people could only look up to. If she wanted to surpass him, she had to break through the limit. Beep. Preparation stage, entering 30 seconds countdown. The moment the referee's whistle sounded, whether it was AI Ma or Dake, they immediately drew their cards. Magic surged naturally, and their minds were highly focused. As the 5 magic cards were drawn one after another, both sides had different expressions. AI Ma cautiously looked up at Dake's projection, and her heart sank. She saw Dake dimming on the red side's platform, naturally revealing a smile. That confidence that seemed to be the same from the beginning to the end made people unable to help but be fascinated. Dake had indeed drawn a good card. Dream Demon, Demon Fox, Fantasy Beast, Ibu, Bliss 3, Pride. Dream Demon, Demon Fox, Ibu. These 3 magic elf cards can be used together with Bliss 3 to evolve to the second tier. Based on the stars, after evolution it will be 4 stars, 5 stars and 6 stars. And the last one, Pride, will be used to suppress the competition. The 30 seconds of thinking seemed to be too much at this moment. Dake drew a magic card and counted silently in his heart. Tick. The moment the preparation stage changed to battle stage. He immediately began to cast the usual summoning spell. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Demon Fox. Dream Demon had enough defense but not enough attack. Fantasy Beast, Ibu the Fairy, did not have an advantage in front of the other 2 magic elves. Only Demon Fox was the signature choice for a strong attack. I wonder if AI Ma can block my attack in the first round? The corner of Dake's mouth raised slightly. After the successful summoning, he placed the Demon Fox magic card on the table, then drew out the next one, Bliss 3. With a trace of pink-white light, it landed in the red team's summoning area. The Demon Fox Beast appeared in a half-squatting posture, and in the next moment, it rushed out with the power of thunder. Demon Fox, use Fox Flash. Dake's command rang out instantly. After the Demon Fox Beast started running for 10 meters, its slender body suddenly became blurry, as if it had disappeared. When it reappeared, it had already crossed the center line, and was rushing towards the blue team's summoning area at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, a magic elf appeared in the blue team's summoning area. Gold Beast X, change form. On the blue team's platform, AI Ma anxiously shouted, her expression serious. After she realized that Dake had drawn a good card, she immediately dismissed the idea of summoning another magic elf, and chose the Gold Beast X in front of her. This was an ancient mechanical type magic elf like the Gold Beast. She had used the same formula as the Gold Beast, but it was refined by a further optimization. Compared to the Gold Beast, which only had Gold Devour, Gold Beast X's magic power, attack, and defense were 1000, 1300 and 1500 respectively. Gold Beast X had a further specialization in defense, and it had 2 sure kill skills. Card name, Gold Beast X. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, mechanical type. Attribute, steel. Magic power, 1500. Attack, 700. Defense, 1600. Sure kill skills. Gold Devour, X transformation. The Gold Beast X, which looked like a golden lion, immediately used its sure kill skill. X transformation. When the Demon Fox rushed over, in the next second, its back split open to both sides, and a golden man in the shape of a human body straightened its back. The body on both sides changed from a solid state to a flowing liquid, flowing and gathering in front of it. When the transformation ended, the Gold Beast X changed from a mighty golden lion to a short soldier holding a huge round shield. The round shield was in the shape of an eggshell, with a diameter of more than 2 meters. The head of the Gold Beast was printed on the surface of the shield, and its eyes were wide open in anger. After the transformation, the Gold Beast X completely gave up on its attack power and transferred it to its defense, which was why it had this golden shield. The entire golden shield just happened to protect the golden man and the blue magic ball inside, like an iron wall. AI Ma looked nervously at the charging Demon Fox and immediately took out the second magic card to prepare. She was very clear that the basic attack of the Demon Fox was only 1500. Even if it was combined with its sure kill skill, it would not be able to break through the Gold Beast X's huge shield in a short time. However, since the Dake Dimming had summoned this magic elf, It was very likely that he had the magic card that could strengthen its transformation. As expected, just as she had this thought, the red contestant platform had already lit up with an extremely dazzling golden light beam. The light beam became more and more condensed under the deliberate control of Dake, and almost directly shot into the body of the demon fox. The demon fox was instantly filled up, and its body gradually turned into light in the process of running. When it completely turned into a body of light, its entire form changed from a human to a beast form. Its body expanded sharply, and its 4 limbs were burning with raging flames. It actually stepped on the blue flames and galloped in the air. Its speed was even faster. Card name, Nine-tailed fox. Type, elf card. Level, race, bird beast. Attribute, fairy/fire. Magic power, 3500. Attack, 2600. Defense, 2600. Sure kill skill, ghost fire jade fox lightning fox flame dragon Tengu. Although the nine-tailed fox's attack and defense were not the best among the 6-star magic elves, it had a terrifying advantage when facing a 3-star magic elf. Even if it had evolved into a magic elf specialized in magic power, it did not hide its ferocity at all as it fiercely crashed into the golden shield. Boom! Like a thunderclap, the nine-tailed fox knocked the golden beast X, who was holding a giant shield, back. The golden shield slid along the ground, and the sound of friction was extremely ear-piercing. AI Ma's expression changed, and the second magic card was already in the midst of summoning. The nine-tailed fox's super-fast speed turned into a huge impact, and the entire giant shield was forcefully smashed inwards. The golden beast X was sent flying out of the arena. Ghost Fire Jade. The nine-tailed fox's mouth curved upwards, and it revealed extreme joy. However, just as it was about to continue the melee, Dake's voice drilled into its ears. It had no choice but to obey, and immediately raised its 9 fluffy big tails. And from the tip of the tails, 9 blazing blue fireballs appeared. The nine-tailed fox fiercely raised its chin, and the blue fireball that shot out from the tip of one of its tails first exploded on the golden shield, and then directly tore it apart. A cold smile appeared on the nine-tailed fox's face, and the second blue fireball was ready to be released. Seeing that after this Ghost Fire Jade, the golden beast X would definitely explode. In the name of AI Ma Métis, magic summoning. AI Ma's voice quickly rang out. She hurriedly completed the summoning at this critical moment, and then suddenly pointed downwards. The magic that shot out from the tip of her finger controlled the magic ball to retreat backwards, and then suddenly fly upwards. When the blue magic ball flew back into the arena, it quickly rose up. Not far in front of AI Ma, the magic elf floating in the air had already been summoned, in the form of an item. On the red arena, Dake Diming's eyebrows twitched, and he could not help but pause his summoning of the Dream Demon. The item that AI Ma had summoned was actually an ancient oil lamp. Of course, Dake would not forget. This oil lamp was obtained by AI Ma together with his holy sword when they first entered the underground city under the lead of Professor Nini. The oil lamp was painted red copper, and the surface was covered with rust. The overall appearance was very similar to the Aladdin's magic lamp in the fairy tale. Dake was not sure if this world had the legend of Aladdin's magic lamp, but he knew that this world did have the wishing artifact. The Shung Malian Academy's Holy Grail was one of the 3 wishing artifacts in this world. AI Ma, did she turn the oil lamp into an item, or a magic elf? With the experience of the Holy Sword, Dake did not arbitrarily treat it as an item. If it was the same type of item card as the single scabbard, weapon form, it was very likely to summon a magic elf on the spot. But if this oil lamp was so useful, why didn't AI Ma summon it at the first moment? Why did she choose the Golden Beast X? This thought flashed through Dake's mind for a moment, and then he saw white smoke billowing out from the spout of the oil lamp. A white-haired girl in a thin dress revealed half of her body from the white smoke. The girl's white hair was casually scattered, and her long bangs covered half of her face. The part that was exposed was pale and pitiful, as if it would disappear at any time. She hugged her hands in front of her chest, as if she was muttering something. The corners of her white dress were torn, and it hung down with the wind, covering her smoky lower body. Suddenly, She slowly raised her head and opened her eyes with a weak face. The white smoke that came out from the spout condensed behind her, and it condensed into a pair of smoke wings that looked like the wings of an angel. On top of her head, there was even a smoke ring. What is this? A wishing angel? Dake's face could not help but reveal a shocked expression. The smoke angel had a pair of golden eyes on her weak face. When she opened her eyes, a sacred and majestic aura that was completely different from her aura burst out. It was the familiar aura of the Holy Sword. This oil lamp and the Holy Sword really came from the same source. Dake completed the summoning of the Dream Demon and quickly ordered it to protect the magic-conducting ball. Then he calmed down and gave a new order to the Nine-Tailed Fox without hesitation. Nine-Tailed Fox, use Ghost Fire Jade and Fire Dragon to attack the oil lamp. The Gold Beast X that was knocked out of the field was no longer a threat. But when the Nine-Tailed Fox carried out the order, it still used a Ghost Fire Jade to end it. Then the remaining 7 Ghost Fire Jades surrounded the dragon-shaped flame that was released from its tail. They roared and rushed toward the oil lamp floating in the air, as well as the wishing angel that came out of the oil lamp. Aima's face was illuminated by the blue fire dragon's flame. She clenched her teeth, closed her hands, and hurriedly prayed. The angel that lives in the magic lamp, please listen to my prayer and help me destroy the enemy in front of me. Angel's judgment. The wishing angel in the sky did the exact same action as her, and the golden eyes suddenly stared at the bottom of its feet. The ghost fire jade surrounded the fire dragon, and the rolling heat surged. Above the head of the wishing angel, the white smoke ring was suddenly dyed with a golden color. That golden smoke ring quickly expanded and stood erect above its head. In the void, a prayer that was similar to Aima's voice suddenly sounded, but it was more oppressive. A beam of golden light suddenly fell from the sky and hit the smoke ring, forming a golden light ring that was perpendicular to the smoke ring. Then it suddenly rotated. The holy aura exploded. Whether it was outside the field or inside the field, countless people were shocked. The sound of the switch was drowned out by the sound waves. Ghost Fire Jade and Fox Flame Dragon, which had been slowed down by the mysterious power, suddenly regained their normal speed after that. But the 2 rings above the wishing angel had completed the announcement. The huge smoke ring and the halo instantly stopped rotating in their original perpendicular state. Looking from above, the 2 rings intersected to form a golden X. Immediately, the wishing angel and magic lamp were instantly swallowed by the 2 sure kill skills of the nine-tailed fox. When the blue flame dragon passed by, the ghost fire jade exploded in the air like fireworks. The nine-tailed fox, on the ground, raised its head and let out a long cry. Then, it stepped on the blue flame and rushed into the sky, following the fire dragon's remnant waves to chase after the blue square magic ball that was constantly rising. The situation on the field was completely clear. Dake's magic elf was still intact, and 2 new magic cards had just been added. Aima's magic elf and magic lamp had disappeared. She could only rely on magic to control the magic ball to try her best to dodge. Her face was very ugly. While controlling the magic ball in a hurry, she didn't even have time to draw a card. The magic ball's life enchantment has 4,000 points. It can barely withstand the full blow of the 6-star magic elf. I still have a chance. She gritted her teeth and forced her hand to draw a card. But it was extremely inconvenient to do it with one hand. She passed the card to her right hand, and her left hand released magic to control the magic ball. Finally, she added 2 new magic cards. While paying attention to the field, she quickly glanced at the cards in her hand. Among the 5 cards in her hand, there was one fading spell. Without thinking about other strategies, Aima drew a flight path for the magic ball, then controlled her magic to pull it, and immediately cast the usual summoning spell. In a desperate situation, she succeeded in suddenly reaching the limit, and finally completed the summoning in 4 seconds. The fading spell's light caught up with the magic ball. When the nine-tailed fox's claw hit it, it gradually became invisible. After a short 0.5 seconds, the magic ball completely disappeared from the nine-tailed fox's eyes. Aima immediately pulled her magic, causing the magic ball to quickly distance itself from the nine-tailed fox. The 5 seconds of invisibility bought her more time to think and summon. She suddenly lowered her head and looked at the cards in her hand again. Then her eyes were filled with despair. All the struggles had been exhausted. But this time, the goddess of luck didn't smile at her. Just like how the genie's, angel's judgment drew X from O and X, none of the 2 new magic cards she drew could help her out of her current predicament. In front of the red side's player platform, the holy sword, that came from the same source as the magic lamp, was ready to attack. Go! Dake put 2 fingers on the sword and stretched out his hand. The scabbard transformed from weapon form to spirit form, and shot out. 5 seconds later, the blue magic ball's invisible state was removed, and it was completely exposed in front of the 9-tailed fox and the scabbard, who were eyeing it covetously. The computer is broken. After a while, the screen will turn blue. It's useless to reinstall the system. There's also a problem with the coding software. I'm going to vomit. Last night, I ordered a hard drive to replace it. I just don't know if it can be fixed. I hope it's not a problem with the motherboard or the memory. 1/4/. Today's update is estimated to be after 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Adjust the time in case the computer can't be fixed. It's to cope with the last 3 days of full attendance. Sigh, let's eat and catch up on sleep. There are less than 3 days until the end of the bounty. It's about to be settled. Chapter 610. There were too many factors involved in the outcome of a magic duel. Among them, the most talked about was the so-called luck. Luck was the biggest uncertain factor in a magic duel. It could greatly increase the viewing value of a duel, but most duelists didn't like to be dominated by luck. Therefore, duelists would try their best to avoid the element of luck through the construction of cards. However, not all duelists didn't like the element of luck. There was even a portion of duelists who would specially construct a deck with luck as the main factor, sacrificing some inevitability in exchange for a greater possibility. From Dake's point of view, AI Ma's card deck now had a little bit of the prototype of a luck card deck. Whether it was the previous 777 treasure chest monster or the current magic wishing lamp, they all required extremely high luck to be used. He wasn't saying that this type of magic card wasn't good. After all, to raise the upper limit above one's own level, some sacrifices had to be made. But the problem was, remember https://m, VIP can't you? VA. Little AI Ma's luck didn't seem to be that good. For example, she used the 777 treasure chest monster more often. Did she change to 777 in a duel? Maybe she should recognize herself early? Dake couldn't help but think. AI Ma was at her wit's end, facing the encirclement of the 9-tailed fox and the single scabbard. Even if her magic power control was strong, she couldn't hold on for too long. In fact, in just a few seconds, the blue magic ball's life enchantment was completely shattered by the sword slash and fire. And this time, the duel between the 2 second-year first seats of the 2 branches had come to an end. Dake looked at the war horn in his hand with some regret. He thought that if AI Ma's luck was better, he might be able to use this newly released item card. 1 minute for 2 rounds was too short. As an audience, it was completely unsatisfying. For the loser, it was also quite hopeless. But AI Ma didn't sink into this. The element of luck limited her performance. She couldn't give it her all. There were still 2 months before the top 8 in December. There were still 3 months before the finals. As long as she continued to improve herself in these 2 months, she would have a chance to win it back in the duel. These 3 months would be a race. Whoever could shake off their opponents in this race would be the one who would have the last laugh. See you in the finals. AI Ma pursed her lips and squeezed out a sentence. She put away the magic card and quickly got off the stage. Dark smiled faintly and walked down the contestant platform. He had already completed 5 out of the 10 points competition matches. He only needed to complete 5 more matches before the Silver Cup match would come to an end for him. He walked out of the stadium with his back facing the cheering audience. This time, he headed towards the Magical Zoology Society's classroom. On Sunday afternoon, Katrina and Brittany were both in the tower. When Dake walked into the classroom, Katrina was reading with Cub in the reading room. Brittany, on the other hand, was knitting on the sofa in the living room. It was autumn now, and the morning and night were cold. She wanted to make some clothes for her little sister. If she had the time, she wanted to make some for Xiangbao as well. After greeting Katrina, Dake went to the empty space in the middle of the 6 classrooms and took out the war horn. Since he couldn't test it in the duel, he would test it outside the duel. He then summoned Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast, and ordered it to blow the horn. Be gentle. Little Devil grabbed the horn and stuffed it into its mouth. Then it puffed up its mouth and blew hard. Instantly, the sound of the horn sounded. It was like the sound of golden spears and thunder. It made people feel like they were on a battlefield. Anger surged in their hearts, and they wanted to vent it. Didn't I tell you to be gentle? Dake snatched the horn and rolled his eyes. Sure enough, not long after, the magical elf and the 2 senior sisters from the club's classroom rushed over. He explained as he put away the war horn. The suppressed anger in his eyes quickly disappeared. However, fury had increased. The effect of the war horn was so obvious that he couldn't help but feel alarmed. Although it was rare to see an item that directly affected one's emotions, it wasn't impossible. In fact, during this period of time he had experienced fury's explosive growth twice. The first time was when he was facing the god's fury, and the second time was when he was spying on the door of truth. If it wasn't for the underworld spiritual spell, he would have lost control. Therefore, he was far from being able to let his guard down. He couldn't expose the 7 deadly sins either. Wait, holding the war horn magic card, Dake suddenly remembered that among the treasures he obtained from the dungeon, there was a Pearl of Charm. The Pearl of Charm and the Crescent Pendant were similar items. They were compatible with bliss and could increase charm. However, the Pearl of Charm's value in the Eye of Truth was higher than the Crescent Pendant. It was on the same level as the Rhino Horn and the Moonstone. Right, there's also the Moonstone. Although the Moonstone didn't show any charm properties, it was compatible with bliss. Before studying the other treasures, I can start with these 2 items. Dake thought quickly. After successfully refining the Moon Pendant and the War Horn, he had a clear idea of what to do. When refining these items into item cards, adding some compatible deadly sins could effectively increase the effects of the final item cards and make them more compatible with his card set. Regardless of whether it was the Moon Pendant or the War Horn, they seemed more useful than the Sickle Dagger. For the next item card, I can try the Pearl of Charm. I remember that in the 3000 item card crafting methods, there's an item called the Gem of Happiness. The Gem of Happiness, as the name suggested, was a gem that could make one happy. It was basically the same type of item as the Card of Happiness. It could make one feel happy and have a more positive attitude towards the new day. However, compared to the Card of Happiness, the effect of the Gem of Happiness was more obvious and harmless. If he could refine a Gem of Happiness, even if it wasn't suitable for a duel, it could be used to suppress negative emotions. Dake quickly made up his mind and summoned all the magic elves. He only called the lion beast and went out. Today was Sunday, and tomorrow would be a new week. He was prepared to go to Traveler's Street again to accumulate more materials that might be useful. If the next week's trip to the dungeon wasn't delayed, then he had less than a week to prepare. The autumn evening had a sweet tangerine flavor. Dake brought the lion beast back from Traveler's Street and went straight to the castle. Not long after, he returned to his dorm. He prepared the materials and took out the 3000 item card crafting methods. He flipped to the page of the Gem of Happiness and studied it carefully. After studying for about half an hour, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He got up and walked to the cabinet filled with materials. Then he took out a pink candle wick and pondered. This pink candle wick was taken out from the pink wick candle. After it was lit, it could stimulate one's spirit and make one happy. The other purple candle wick was taken out from the purple wick candle. After it was lit, it could make one see illusions from the candle flame. The combination of these 2 magic candles was probably stronger than the Gem of Happiness. If I use these 2 candles as supplementary materials and add in 2 drops of bliss, what can I refine in the end? The more Dake thought about it, the more he felt that it was feasible. He took out a pink candle wick and a purple candle wick. Then he used the 3,000 item card crafting methods to test them. After obtaining the specific data, he thought about replacing some of the supplementary materials in the Gem of Happiness. Finally, he tried to make adjustments to the softener, ink, and magic language. At 9 o'clock in the evening, he finally made some progress in his research and couldn't wait to start the experiment. At this time, the magic elves living in the dormitory had already returned from the club. However, they were very quiet. Some were reading books, some were lying down, and some were doing their next small tasks. When Dake began to prepare the experiment tools, the magic elves looked over curiously, but they just watched. Yes, they liked to watch Dake's experiment, especially the last part of the experiment. It was like a prize. At the beginning of the experiment, Dake first took out the 12 purple candles and 12 pink candles. Then he put them into a simple softener. Because they were supplementary materials, the requirements for the softener of these two candles were not very high. Dake quickly made the corresponding softener. However, the softener of the Pearl of Charm was not so easy to make. He began to try again and again. Although he failed again and again, each failure meant that he had eliminated a wrong choice. He gradually found the right direction and was ready to boldly and decisively move forward. Aurora knocked on the door. "Let's eat supper first." Dake put down the tools and stopped. After dinner, Dake continued to make the softener. He didn't know if it was because of the nourishment effect, but he found that he was getting more and more proficient. It didn't take long for him to make the softener suitable for the Pearl of Charm. He put the Pearl of Charm into the softener and observed for a moment. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he began to make the ink. The Pearl of Charm was about the size of a palm. It was perfectly round and flawless. The surface was crystal clear, but there were clouds lingering inside and pink embellishments. After injecting magic power, it would emit pink light outside, mesmerizing people. After all the preparations were done, Dake began to modify the magic language. The Pearl of Charm's softening time was about 2 hours. After that, it would last for another hour. Therefore, he had a lot of time. As for the matter of 3 hours later, it would be 1 o'clock in the morning. That was not a problem. 2 hours later, Dake finally pushed the experiment to the last step. He looked at the mountain of garbage next to him and couldn't help but feel embarrassed. While he took the Pearl of Charm out of the softener, he quickly adjusted his mentality and then began the final smelting. First, he put the auxiliary materials, including the purple candle wick and the pink candle wick, into the Heimer smelting array. Then he put the Pearl of Charm in. When the Pearl of Charm was half melted, he dripped bliss into the smelting array. He was already familiar with this series of steps. Dake adjusted the output of magic power while putting in the materials. Whether it was the control of magic power or the control of his fingers, it was terrifyingly stable. He was like a natural-born researcher. He had all the necessary qualities. First, the first drop of bliss. Dake carefully observed the Heimer smelting array. The pearl that sank halfway into the light array was like a pink full moon. Purple and pink light waves rippled out with it as the center. Layer by layer, circle by circle, it had a dreamy beauty. Drip. Dake suddenly came back to his senses. The drop of bliss had already fallen into the light array. He hurriedly gathered his magic power and carefully adjusted it. He found that the drop of bliss had already spread out on the surface of the light array and painted the whole light array with a layer of golden pink. But this layer of golden pink quickly sank under the surface of the light. He focused slightly and picked up the magic brain dropper to suck the second drop of bliss from the thinking bottle. The second drop. He slowly suppressed the demon brain in the dropper, causing it to emit a shrill cry. The pink liquid slid down from the dropper and finally left the sharp beak and fell into the smelting array. The Pearl of Charm continued to sink. The second drop of bliss was also quickly melted into the smelting array. The whole light array began to emit a strong light. It was a sign that the smelting array was about to be saturated. But Dake didn't stop. He quickly considered and used the magic brain dropper to draw the third drop of bliss from the thinking bottle again. Drip. The injection of this drop of bliss finally caused the entire smelting array to be completely saturated. Before the pearl of charm sank, it had been completely dyed pink. The surface of the light array actually revealed a strange green from bottom to top. The green light penetrated the pink surface and drew a familiar emblem. Obviously, 3 points of bliss were enough to make the emblem appear. Dake's eyes lit up and immediately understood the meaning. If this pearl of charm was successfully made into an item card, it would definitely be strengthened to a new level. A total of 3 drops, 3 points of bliss. If it doesn't succeed, the loss will be great. Dake retracted his hand and put down the magic dropper. The next process was no longer something he could influence. All he could do was wait patiently. And the magic elves who sensed that the experiment had reached the end also pricked up their ears and widened their eyes, waiting for the final result. Whoosh! The light array of the ocean smelting array was sucked into the magic card in an instant, leaving only a small cocoon of light. The material that was fused began the final high-speed reaction. Dake switched the magic pen to his right hand and waited patiently. 2 minutes later, the magic card began to emit pink, purple, and green light. Large amounts of impurities were constantly expelled from the surface of the card, emitting an unpleasant fishy smell. Dake could feel the irritation in the smell and couldn't help but frown. "Little devil, open the window." The little devil flew up from the small bed and used its claws to open the window. On the other side, Ivan, who happened to be at the balcony door, also opened the balcony door. Suddenly, the night wind poured in, bringing with it a slight chill. As the smell was expelled, the smelting process continued. Clack! The magic card suddenly bounced, causing Dake's hand to tremble. However, a smile soon appeared on his face, because the reaction had ended. Although the end of the reaction didn't mean that the smelting was successful, it was still closer to success. Dake used a pair of tweezers to pick up the dirty magic card and rinsed it under the tap. Voila! Various materials of different colors were flushed into the pool and then flowed into the filter at the outlet of the drain. They were then guided into the filter device. Dake would eventually throw away the trash in the filter device so it wouldn't pollute the drain. When all the materials on the surface of the magic card had been washed away, the final result was finally revealed. Just the gradually emitted pink halo made one realize there was no doubt about it. Dake held the magic card in front of him and looked at the surface of the card. He saw that there was a glowing orb on the surface of the card. The surface of the orb was still transparent, but the inside was no longer shrouded in clouds. Although there were remnants of the clouds, there was only a tiny bit that covered the bottom of the bright moon. Yes, Dake saw the moon in the orb. It wasn't a full moon like a basin, but a more typical crescent moon. The pink clouds floated under the crescent moon. Suddenly, a small thing emerged from the clouds and climbed up the crescent moon with great difficulty. It sat there as if it was sitting on a swing. Dark's face froze when he saw this. This is a moon rabbit? There was a moon in the orb and a rabbit on the moon. Dake looked at the magic card in his hand and realized that the smelting this time was likely to be an unprecedented success. He hurriedly grabbed the magic card and injected a trace of magic into it. Soon he received a feedback. Card name, Bright Night Orb. Type, Item Card. Effect, Charm +3, Happiness +3. Ultimate skill, Bright Night Concubine. Bright Night Concubine. Awaken the moon rabbit named Bright Night Concubine. Summon the night sky and a bright moon. In 5 rounds, the moonlight will become stronger, thus increasing the power of the moon and suppressing the power of the sun. The power of the ultimate skill using the power of the moon will increase by 50%, and the power of the sun will decrease by 50%. The moon summoned by Bright Night Concubine will gradually change from a new moon to a full moon. In the last round, it will maintain a full moon state. Full moon, which is the night of the full moon. Dake's mind moved, and he immediately thought of the ultimate skill, Moon Palace Chariot. Although he had never used Moon Palace Chariot publicly, Moon Palace Chariot was one of the core ultimate skills of Moon God Personality Armament. Naturally, he remembered its effects clearly. One of the additional effects of Moon Palace Chariot was that it could release Moon God's blessing on the night of the full moon. If it was moon god, it could also receive charming body and moonlight tribute. Moon god's blessing was a large-scale healing ultimate skill that could restore 1/3 of the maximum HP of all the HP within the Moon Palace. Moonlight Tribute was a high-speed self-healing ultimate skill that could restore Moon God 1% of its maximum mana every second. Although Bright Night Concubine only had a full moon for 30 seconds, it was enough to restore 30% of its mana. Moreover, Moon God had another ultimate skill, Lunar Eclipse. If it was released on a night of the full moon, it could double the power. If it could be stacked with Bright Night Concubine's bonus effect on the power of the moon, it would be 250%. Thinking about it carefully, Bright Night Pearl and Moon God were a perfect match. Moreover, there were many among Dake's magic elves that could use the power of the moon, and there would definitely be more in the future. This Bright Night Pearl was definitely the core of the Bliss series of cards. Thinking of this, Dake could not help but chant the usual summoning spell and summon the Bright Night Pearl. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic summoning. After the summoning was completed, a faint pink light appeared on the card surface, and a transparent pearl slowly floated out of the card surface. When it completely materialized, the pink rabbit sitting on the swing on the crescent moon suddenly jumped up. Its extremely small body jumped out of the pearl and turned into a fat rabbit that was even bigger than the pearl. Dark was taken aback. He instinctively reached out and grabbed the 2 long ears of the pink furry rabbit. Then he and the pink rabbit stared at each other, and suddenly let go of his hand as if he had been electrocuted. The pink rabbit grabbed the pearl with its 2 hands and rolled it to the ground. The radiant night orb was much larger than the orb of charm. It hugged the orb and rolled it 2 times before arriving in front of Evie's feet. Fairy Ibu's ribbon was wrapped around a bottle of apple juice, and it was about to hand it to its owner. Me? It raised its front foot to push the pink rabbit, and revealed a puzzled expression. Didn't you say you were refining item cards? Why did a fat rabbit come out? The pink furry rabbit slowly sat up and smiled intimately at Fairy Ibu. Then it rubbed its chubby cheeks against Fairy Ibu, its face full of enthusiasm. However, Fairy Ibu immediately revealed a disgusted expression and took a step back. Although the rabbit's body was giving off a very nice smell, Fairy Ibu wasn't so casual. The only one who could rub against it was Dake. After Fairy Ibu avoided the pink rabbit, it quietly raised its head to look at Dake. When it looked, it suddenly discovered that Dake's face had turned red. Phew. Dake couldn't help but hold his forehead and let out a mouthful of turbid air. The pink rabbit and the Bright Night Pearl were a single entity. Grabbing the pink rabbit was equivalent to equipping the Bright Night Pearl, and the Pleasure +3 effect would naturally occur. The incident with the war horn was still fresh in his mind. He had always been vigilant and wouldn't rashly touch the Bright Night Pearl. He hadn't thought that he would fall into the rabbit's trap. Bliss and fury are indeed different. Dake forcefully rubbed his head, trying to calm himself down as quickly as possible. Although the war horn had rage +2, after releasing it, the rage would instead pour out. He had originally thought that the Bright Night Pearl was the same. Perhaps he could even use it to enter the Sage mode. He hadn't thought that this thing wouldn't work at all after releasing it. Rage can pour out, but pleasure can't be eliminated. What's the logic behind this? He looked helplessly at the pink rabbit. The appearance of this rabbit was also unexpected. However, thinking about it carefully, there were similar examples in his magic cards. The Moon Goddess's soul eye was based on the Moon Goddess's soul. This rabbit named Huiji should be a similar existence. It wasn't a magic fairy, but something similar to a weapon spirit. I wonder if it has sentience? After all, the Moon Goddess's soul was special and couldn't be used as a reference. This Bright Night Pearl was still a part of the tool in the end, and was fundamentally different from a magic fairy. Let's observe it for a while. Dake thought for a moment, picked up a pair of gloves from the table, then squatted down and clapped his hands at the pink rabbit, saying, "Come here." The pink rabbit's ears immediately perked up, and it immediately picked up the Bright Night Pearl and ran towards him. Seeing this, Goddess Ibu frowned. When it walked closer, Dake reached out and hugged it. The pair of gloves used in the laboratory that could isolate magic was indeed useful. Dake sighed softly and said to the pink rabbit, "Can you understand me?" Of course, this was nonsense. The pink rabbit tilted its head, and suddenly raised the bright night pearl, and handed it to him. Dake couldn't help but be startled, then laughed. "I don't want this. You're called Bright Night Pearl, right? So obedient." Meow, the pink rabbit immediately narrowed its eyes, revealing a look of enjoyment. Dake had a slight understanding. This rabbit probably had sentience, but it seemed to be at the pet level. At most, it had the intelligence of a human child. I wonder if the Great Sin card can increase its intelligence? Dake thought for a moment, then chose Bliss 2 to try to increase its intelligence. But when the light of bliss shone on the pink rabbit, it didn't produce the expected effect. Therefore, Dark knew that this pink furry rabbit could not possibly read. He put away Bliss 2, looked up at the ceiling and muttered, "Try to reduce the range and use the ultimate skill, Bright Night Pearl?" The pink rabbit seemed to have heard the key words, and immediately raised the pearl in its hand above its head, then softly called out to the ceiling twice. The next second, the light in the room seemed to have been sucked away, and for a moment, it was completely dark. But the darkness disappeared in a flash, and it was quickly illuminated by the light again. However, there were indeed clouds below the ceiling. The part of the night above the clouds was like a curtain, and no matter what, it couldn't be illuminated. And in this night, a new moon slowly revealed its crescent. If one took a closer look, they would discover that the new moon was slowly becoming full. As one of the users of the moon force, Fairy Ibu immediately felt the magic power in its body vibrate. The moonlight of Bright Night Pearl was clearly more condensed than the moonlight outside, and it greatly increased its power. If it released moon force here, it would definitely increase its power by 150%. This would make Fairy Ibu's ultimate skill have a terrifying power that surpassed the stars. It looked at the bright moon, its eyes bright and full of vigor. Of course, it wasn't good to try out Moon Palace Sedan in the dormitory. But when Dake looked at the moon that was gradually becoming full, he suddenly thought of the corresponding sun, Great Clear Sky, Arrogant Version, and Spirit Illusion Bug. So while Bright Night Pearl's effect was still active, he summoned the Spirit Illusion Bug. But the moment this glowing bug was summoned, it died on the spot. So this is morning life, evening death? Dake took a deep breath and decided to share this matter with Professor Kazair to help him continue researching the Spirit Illusion Bug. The time had come. Dake didn't talk to anyone at 1 a.m. While he was cleaning up the remnants of the experiment, he continued the Great Sin extraction that had been delayed because of the experiment. According to his calculations, he extracted 1 drop and 2 points of fury. He would have to do it again tomorrow night. A total of 4 points of fury. And if he extracted 3 points, he would be able to obtain a Fury 2 that could draw out the emblem. At that time, he would be able to truly research Fury. Dake quickly went to sleep after planning last night. The next morning, Dark slept all the way until 7 o'clock before he woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he found a familiar basket on the table. Although the little devil brought breakfast, it only quietly went back and forth and didn't wake him up. Dake's lips curled up. He enjoyed it very much. There was still an hour before class, so he finished washing up and eating in half an hour. He grabbed his bag and hurried out. The first class of the day was Professor Shi-Erfa's summoning class. Dake was almost late for this class, so he was a lot more serious in class. Professor Shi-Erfa used the opening matches of the Silver Cup as an example to talk about the importance of summoning, and called him up to the podium to perform. After the normal summoning, he used sacrificial summoning in class and finally received Professor Shi-Erfa's personal guidance. Thus, he improved again and was 1 step closer to the 3-second limit. High-level duelists could use sacrificial summoning as normal summoning. Just a normal sacrificial summoning could summon a high-level magic elf in an extremely short time. This was very important basic knowledge in duels. After the summoning class ended, Dake took the opportunity to ask Professor Shi-Erfa about his schedule for the weekend. After learning that the schedule hadn't changed, he was relieved but also felt a sense of urgency. After the summoning class was Professor Zayer's Magic Introduction class. Let's not talk about what Magic Introduction was about. After the Magic Introduction class, Dake told Professor Zayer about the Radiant Night Pearl and the Spirit Bug. As expected, he captured Professor Zayer's interest. Thus, the two agreed to continue the experiment in the club's classroom that night. The Spirit Bug experiment didn't take too much time, but after each experiment, Professor Zayer would sit down and chat with him for half an hour. He learned a lot from these half an hour. It could be said that he could use the Spirit Bug research to get Professor Zayer's personal guidance for free. Of course, from Professor Zayer's point of view, this was an equivalent exchange. This was also in line with the Academy's rules for teachers. After the potionology class in the afternoon, Dark plucked up his spirits and continued to study how to make the item cards. As the saying goes, the first drum builds up the spirit, the second weakens the spirit, and the third exhausts the spirit. He had basically summed up the experience of making a set of special item cards, and it was time to use it flexibly. This time his research object was the moonstone. The stone with the crescent moon imprint contained natural moon power. After Dake brought it back to the dorm, he didn't put it in the corner of the cupboard. Instead, he put it on the balcony at night, letting the moonlight shine on it. After a few days, the moon power in the moonstone's body increased. This convinced him of the moonstone's value. In the eye of truth's eyes, it was the same as the Radiant Night Pearl, Rhino Horn, and Bronze Mirror. It was between the Catgrass and the Magic Braindropper. If possible, Dake wanted to make it into the Moonstone in Pokemon. In Pokemon, the Moonstone was a special stone that could make certain Pokemon evolve. For example, it could make Pippi evolve into Pikisi, and Pangding evolve into Pangding. Although he didn't have such a magical fairy yet, he really wanted to have a Pippi or a Pippi baby. Pippi was a fairy's Pokemon under the moonlight, and it always appeared with the Moonstone mine. As time passed, Dake was very sure that he would be able to make a Pippi one day. If he could successfully make a Moonstone, it could be considered as preparing for its evolution in advance. Of course, in Dark's heart, it was inevitable that he had other thoughts. For example, if Ibu wanted to evolve into Icy Ibu, he would need to use Ice Stone in Pokemon. However, he could use Greed 3 to replace Ice Stone. Then, could he use Moonstone to replace Bliss 3? This was a very valuable research topic. He had 3 points of Bliss left. If he succeeded, it would mean that he could use 3 points of Bliss to make a Bliss 3 substitute. After that, he would only need to buy the same type of stone, and he would be able to make Bliss 3 substitutes in large quantities. The Bliss series of cards was starting to take shape. Moreover, his current tactical system was limited by the number of Great Sin cards in actual combat. Not only could each evolution only last for 15 minutes, but he would also need to replenish the Great Sin cards after each use. If he had a large number of substitutes, the magical fairy would be able to maintain its evolution state for a long time. Currently, there wasn't much demand for substitutes in the school, but if he were to accidentally fall into a prolonged battle, these substitutes would be necessary. After Dake returned to his dorm, he began to search for a similar Moonstone in the 3,000 items, 8,000 crafting methods. However, this time, he didn't get what he wanted. The closest thing to the Moonstone in his heart was an item called the Dark Magic Stone. Dake didn't know how the author of the 3,000 items, 8,000 crafting methods, knew how to refine the Dark Magic Stone. But this item was originally a special item that high-level demons used to reward low-level demons. For example, low-level demons like Little Monsters had a chance of transforming into higher-level demons after using the Dark Magic Stone. Of course, there was a higher chance that they would be devoured by the Dark Magic Stone and turn into a pile of flesh and blood. In the 3,000 items, 8,000 crafting methods, there was only a way to refine the Dark Magic Stone into an item card, but there were no taboos. After careful consideration, Dake decided to bring this book with him to discuss life with Professor Zayer tonight. 8 p.m. sharp. Dake prepared pastries and tea in the living room of the club classroom. Finally, Professor Zayer arrived. He and the professor exchanged good evening, and walked straight to the open space among the 6 classrooms. The club members knew that he had a new experiment to do, so they all quietly followed him. Professor Kazir didn't mind and said eagerly, "Take out your Bright Night Pearl for me to see?" "Okay." Dake nodded slightly and took out the Bright Night Pearl magic card. After showing the card in front of Professor Kazir, he immediately began to summon. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic card summoning, Bright Night Pearl. Under the illumination of the pink light, the pink-furred rabbit holding the pearl appeared. "Its name is Bright Night Pearl," Dake introduced as he pressed the magic pen against the pink rabbit's head. Professor Kazir sat down and observed for a while, then nodded and said, "Use the field skill." Dake gave the order to the pink rabbit to use the ultimate skill, Bright Night Pearl. Meow, the pink rabbit obediently turned around, then raised the pearl above its head and called softly twice. The next moment, the light shining in from outside was instantly absorbed, causing the open space to fall into darkness. When the darkness passed, a layer of night had already opened up above. The new moon appeared in the night sky. Professor Kazir couldn't help but sigh. When he saw Dake's Ivan use Great Sunny Day to summon the sun for the first time, he was already very surprised. He never thought that he would be able to see the field skill summoning the moon so soon. The extremely rich power of the moon in this place made him feel as if divinity was mixed in, but in reality there wasn't. "Summon the spirit illusion bug," he said slowly. Dake summoned the spirit illusion bug. Morning Death's characteristic was activated on the spot. "The hard drive will only arrive tomorrow, but I keep feeling that the computer is reaching its limit. Every time I type, the screen freezes. If I type again, the screen will turn blue. I wouldn't be surprised if the computer suddenly stops working. Crash. 15/. There's only 1 day left in August. Don't waste your monthly votes and blades. There's less than 24 hours until the bounty ends. If you're in good shape, you can pay it back in 2 months. It's not a big problem." Chapter 611. The moon hung high in the sky, its moonlight bright and clear. As soon as the spirit illusion worm appeared, its glowing body turned into specks of light and slowly scattered until it disappeared. Professor Kazir stared at the place where the spirit illusion worm disappeared and said, "Let's try using Great Clear Sky." "Yes, teacher." Dake turned around and waved at little Ivan, who was peeking at them from time to time. Squeak. Ibu immediately squeezed in, jumping over like a rabbit. Dake took out the newest Pride 2 and placed it on its head, summoning it softly. Ivan quickly rose to 2 stars in the golden light, and a sure kill skill named Great Clear Sky was added to his list of sure kill skills. Immediately after, it raised its head and released Great Clear Sky. With great familiarity, Great Sunny Day Pride, and Bright Night Concubine, these 2 sure kill skills undoubtedly countered each other. The rising sun dispelled the night, causing the bright moon that was turning into a full moon to lose its luster. The curtain of night melted, and the day came. Website: https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP. Suddenly, a glimmer of light appeared where the spirit illusion insect had disappeared. Then more light appeared out of thin air, condensing into a small ball of light in the center. The spirit illusion insect's feet emerged from the small ball of light. A pair of thin wings spread out on its back, and it slowly flew up. Die in the morning, live in the morning, die in the evening. Kazir's face was filled with emotion. 2.5 minutes later, as the sun set, the spirit illusion worm died again. However, it didn't return to the card after death like most magic elves. Dake needed to remove the summon in order to retrieve it. "Professor, do you see anything from this?" Dake asked curiously. Professor Kazir smiled and changed the topic. "Do you know about necromancers?" Dake nodded. "I know a little." Professor Kazir said, "A friend once told me that at the end of his life, the concept of life and death was blurred. He can't tell whether he is dead or alive, so he often forgets to eat." Dark couldn't help but frown. "Is he dead?" Professor Kazir smiled and said, "He's dead but not completely dead." Dake nodded. "Understood." Professor Kazir said, "The spirit illusion bug's morning life, evening death, has nothing to do with the undead. But they all explain the same principle. The line between life and death may not be as clear as we think. Dake said, Professor, you told me before. An individual's life could be divided into 3 parts: the body, the soul, and the consciousness. However, both the body and the soul were carriers of consciousness. The meaning of death was the death of one's consciousness. If his consciousness is gone, can he be revived? Professor Kazair raised his head slightly and said, I'm not an expert in this area, and my knowledge is limited. Perhaps there is something deeper beyond consciousness, but you and I have yet to reach it. For example, do you know about the twilight of the gods? Dake said, Yes, I do. Professor Kazair smiled and said, Then do you know how many twilight of the gods has been through? This. Dake subconsciously thought deeply, and then his lips parted in shock. The twilight of the gods? It can't all be the same group of gods, right? Professor Kazair said unhurriedly, Who knows? They returned to the living room and continued their discussion about the morning life, evening death, of the spirit illusion bug. 10 minutes later, Dake took the opportunity to raise his doubts. The dark magic stone. Professor Kazair pondered. However, he wasn't surprised that Dake mentioned the dark magic stone. If I remember correctly, it should be the work of a demon alchemist. It's a mixture of the blood and magic of a high-level demon, and it's a very fatal poison for humans. But for low-level demons, it's still poison. Is the survival rate very low? Dake couldn't help but ask. Professor Kazair shook his head and said, Not even 1 out of 100. Furthermore, these 100 were all demons who had been carefully selected and possessed a certain amount of potential. But in the demon race, the hierarchy is very strict, and it's very difficult to surpass the hierarchy. Although the dark magic stone has a high mortality rate, it's a rare shortcut that can allow one to soar to the heavens. Once you endure it, you'll be like a snake turning into a dragon, or a sparrow turning into a phoenix. From then on, you'll reach the heavens in a single step. I see. Dake immediately understood. No wonder the 3,000 items, 8,000 training methods, didn't explain it in detail. Even if the dark magic stone was refined into an item card, it couldn't change the problem of the extremely low success rate. No, it was possible that the success rate would be even lower. After an item was refined into an item card, if there were no additional materials added, it would normally deteriorate. Especially for single-use items like the dark magic stone, the deterioration would be even more obvious. With the dark magic stone refinement method as a template, even if the moonstone was successfully refined into an item card, it might not be possible. Let's give it a try. Believe in yourself. Believe in bliss. If you don't try, how will you know if it's good or bad? Dake continued to ask about the dark magic stone. Professor Kazair seemed to be in a good mood, and he especially stayed a little longer tonight. It wasn't until 9 o'clock in the evening that he waved goodbye. Dake sent him out of the club classroom, quickly tidied up, and brought the magic elves back to the dormitory. After that, he tasted the supper that Aurora sent over while absorbing the knowledge that Professor Kazair imparted to him. Wow, it's delicious. Because he still had to go to mathematics. The next day, Dake didn't study too late. Not only that, but he also set aside half an hour to preview tomorrow's class. Of course, before going to sleep, he didn't forget to draw 2 points of fury. This way he had 4 points of fury, and he could refine a new Great Sin card tomorrow afternoon. Holding the anticipation for Fury 2, Dake fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, Dake arrived at the first-year mathematics classroom on time for the first class. For the first-year students, September was a month to adapt, and October was a month to break through. From this month onwards, their homework would suddenly increase, and they would become extremely busy. Dake followed the overall trend and added some bricks and tiles to their already busy homework. If one wanted to learn mathematics, well, doing questions was the only way. Especially the first-year mathematics. It wasn't difficult, and there was no possibility of not understanding it if one studied it seriously. Only by learning and doing more could one build a good foundation. If one's foundation wasn't solid, they would really fall into a trap in their future studies. Dake wouldn't be merciful on this point. After school in the afternoon, Dake warmed up his hands and started to refine Fury 2 in the dormitory. Using the Mageweth transformed from the temple murals, he quickly completed the creation of this Fury 2. As expected, for a Great Sin card, this refining method is close to perfection. Dake observed the final Fury 2 card and was quite satisfied. The Fury 2 card's surface was dark red, and the edges were engraved with a dense circle of magic patterns. Staring at this dark red color for a long time, a surge of anger would surge out. Dake was sure that the Fury 2 card was completed, so he looked around and tried to find a test subject. However, at this time, the magic elves were either running around the castle or studying seriously in the club classroom. He suddenly realized that even the little devil monster wasn't by his side. It's numb. Dake reached out and touched his card bag, wondering if he should summon the little devil monster. However, when he thought about summoning Ivan, the shape-shifting monster, the ancient beast? Right, there's still the ancient beast. At the thought of the ancient beast, Dake decided to take his books and go to the club classroom. When he arrived at the club classroom, it was already 5 in the afternoon. Deanna and Luosi were already preparing to go to the cafeteria for dinner, but Katerina and Brittany weren't there yet. Perhaps it was because the club's classroom was too high, but the 2 senior sisters had started coming to the club's classroom after dinner. That way, they could skip a round trip. In the face of Deanna's warm invitation for dinner, Dake chose to decline. He then picked up Ivan from the sofa and went into the president's office. In reality, there weren't many test subjects for the Fury 2 card. Although the little devil monster and the shape-shifting monster could use the Fury 2 card to increase their stars, the changes weren't that big. The ones that he really needed to pay attention to were Ivan and the ancient beast. Dark couldn't wait to find out what kind of field skill illusory beast Ibu would awaken under Fury 2. Ivan, who was confused because he didn't see Dake make the Fury 2 card, let out a confused cry. Doing a little experiment, Dake said as he rubbed his little nose. Little Ivan couldn't help but think about what kind of experiment it was. Then he suddenly noticed that Dake didn't call the little devil monster along. There was no little devil monster. There was only Ivan. Ivan was the first to receive so many rewards. Ivan, great victory. What are you thinking about? Dake locked the door and sat down behind his desk. He then put Ivan on his knees and poked his forehead. Ivan immediately revealed a bashful smile, his eyes drifting to a corner. Dake shook his head and said, "Focus, I don't want to be bitten by you." Ivan, Dake had already taken out the Fury 2 card and pressed it on Ivan's head. Ivan's nose twitched as he smelled the scent of the war horn from the magic card. His eyes immediately lit up as he guessed what kind of card it was. In the name of Dake Dimung magic summoning, the Fury 2 card shone with a deep red light, and in the blink of an eye, Ivan was surrounded by the light. Ivan immediately felt a burning anger from the bottom of his heart, and his eyes gradually turned red, but he fiercely clenched his teeth and endured it. Today was different from the past. He was no longer the Ivan who was bewitched by a mere Great Sin 2 card. This little bit of anger, he clenched his teeth and endured it. Well done. Dake touched his back twice and then focused on his forehead. The emblem of Fury shone from under the fur, and it was an orange glow that resembled the sunset. From this, it could be seen that the Fury emblem was orange, and after being refined into a card, the color would be deep red. Deep red, it was a fiery anger. Orange, it was a suppressed anger. Dake placed his hand on the photocopied book on the table, and with a bit of concentration he copied the Fury Great Sin emblem. In the middle of the Fury emblem was an imprint formed by 3 pi overlapping each other. On top of the imprint was the astronomical symbol of Jupiter, a symbol that looked like a 4. The outer circle of the emblem was an English circle, level 666 system, Satan code, wrath. Below the imprint, in the inner circle of the emblem, were the words, caution, purgatory level 3 map, outer circle, level 666 system, Satan password, greed. Inner circle, warning, purgatory level 3 Satan. So the demon god of fury is Satan? Fury is the third in purgatory. The star that symbolizes fury is actually Jupiter. It's actually Jupiter. X3 Dake could not help but reveal an expression of disbelief. One had to know that among the stars in this world, Jupiter was a planet with the wood attribute, which was the attribute grass. The color is dark red, the emblem is orange, and the main attribute is grass? Is this hinting at sunlight's inferno? Wait, isn't grass the attribute of the Emerald Holy Sword? Dake's heart suddenly moved, and he instantly woke up from his shock when he exposed the fury's main attribute. Fury's main attribute was grass, which was good for the Emerald Holy Sword. It just so happened that the Emerald Holy Sword could absorb sunlight and emit a grass beam like the sunlight's inferno, which was a perfect fit. With that, the Emerald Holy Sword's refining requirements were met, and the only thing left was to find suitable secondary materials. If it was a high-grade antelope horn or antler, then the possibility of refining it into perigon would be higher. With that in mind, Dake's mood calmed down. He then picked up Illusory Beast, Earbook's magic card, and infused it with magic to obtain feedback. Soon, the relevant information flowed into his mind. Card name, Illusory Beast Earbook. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Bird/Beast. Attribute, Normal. Magic, 500 Attack, 700 Defense, 300 Ultimate Skills, Imitation, Round Eye. Desire, Grassfield, Raging Round Eye, Crazy Grassfield. After writing in the morning, I fell asleep for 2 hours before I was woken up to get a delivery. After a whole day, I finally reset the computer. Goodbye to the blue screen, goodbye to lag. My eyes hurt from sleepiness. Go to sleep after calculating the rewards. Work harder in October. Chapter 6:12. Eye of the Circle. Earbook stares at his opponent with an angry gaze, causing the opponent to feel fear and reducing their desire to attack. The information regarding Eye of the Circle was not out of Dake's expectations. After Earbook had used Fury 2 to reach 2-star, he had also successfully obtained a new field skill, Grassland Field. Grassland Field was undoubtedly a grass-type field skill. However, Dake vaguely remembered that it was originally a field skill with a group healing effect. Every target standing on the grassland field would be healed. This effect was completely different from Fury. He thought for a while and continued to check. Other than Grassland Field and Eye of the Circle, Earbook's third Surekill skill had also become a skill with Fury's characteristics. Pride is help. Greed is desire. Bliss is spoiled. Fury is revenge. I remember that revenge's original effect is, if a comrade falls in the previous round, the power will double? If this Surekill skill was in the hands of a high-attack magic elf, it would definitely be a godly skill. It's a pity that Earbook as a fantasy beast only has 700 attack after reaching 2-star. Dake thought regretfully as he injected more magic power into the card. Immediately after, a deeper level of information was fed back. He suddenly frowned. The first thing that caught his attention was not Grassland Field, but revenge. Out of his expectations, revenge had a huge change compared to the original version. Revenge, fury. When a comrade falls one by one, the desire for revenge will cause the flames of fury to burn. Each comrade's fall will cause Earbook's power to double. The double here should be relative to the base power. Even so, it's already very exaggerated. This means that for each comrade that falls, Earbook will receive an all-around boost in power. In terms of attack, it's plus 700. Sacrificing a comrade, 1400 attack. Sacrificing 2 comrade, 2100 attack. Sacrifice 3 companions. If he can hold it in for 7 or 8 rounds, or if he's paired with the Zoo series of quick summon cards, Ivan's attacks can quickly accumulate. Even if he only has the power for 1 attack, he can still reverse the situation. The problem is how to deliver it to the enemy. What is the upper limit of the increase in strength? And how long can the rage last? This isn't easy to experiment with. Also, are the clones counted as individuals? Dake hugged Ivan and began to ponder. If he could study all of this, revenge would have a wide range of uses. With Earbook's short legs coupled with the Nightmare Realm, he might be able to achieve unexpected results. Apart from increasing his speed, the Dream Demon could instantly switch positions with his target within the Nightmare Realm, allowing Ivan to enter the battlefield. If Revenge was stacked 7 or 8 times, it would really be able to pierce through the sky with a single punch. Dake couldn't help but hug Ibu and rub his cheeks. Ivan was already having a hard time holding it in. After being rubbed, he couldn't hold it in any longer and bit down on Roland's arm. Oh! Dake grabbed Ivan by the back of his neck and continued to observe the grassland field. Grassland field. Fury causes the ground to turn into a grassland field for 5 rounds. The grass on the field will become frenzied and aggressive. Apart from the magic fairy with the Fury factor, any magic fairy on the ground will be entangled by the grass and attacked. The magic fairy that is entangled will have its life force, magic power, sucked away. This life force will be halved and distributed to the magic fairy with the Fury factor on the grassland field. Standing on the grassland field, grass-type sure-kill skills will be increased by 30%. Absorbing the opponent's life force to feed itself? As expected, this is Fury's home field. But it only increases the grass-type sure-kill skills by 30%, slightly lower than the other field's 50%. If I want to use this skill flexibly, I need to study the amount of life force absorbed. If it's similar to Sandstorm's damage, it can absorb 10 to 20 points of true damage per second. That would be terrifying. After observing the grassland field, Dake couldn't help but sigh. It would be great if Ivan was a high-star magic fairy, but a man who was never content was like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Nothing could be perfect. Overall, Dake was quite satisfied. He was in a good mood, so he played with the angry Ivan for a while before starting to record. After Ivan, it's the Sabegu. I can go to the cafeteria for a meal first. He brought a few magic fairies to the cafeteria for a meal before returning. Fury 2's cooldown was almost over. Dake called the Sabegu into his office and picked up the little Sabegu that was following behind it. He asked, "How's your studies recently?" "It's all right." The Sabegu poked its fingers and revealed a rare shy expression. I want to fight too." Dake was startled and frowned slightly. He thought for a moment and said, "It's not impossible." The Sabegu was the same as the little demon beasts. They were both tamed demons and relied on the curse cage to become a normal magic fairy with combat power. Because tamed demons were generally only 1 star, they were not prohibited from being used in duels other than club challenges. Of course, because they were only 1 star, they would not be used in normal duels. But Dake's Sabegu was different. It was a 2-star magic fairy, and its combat power was not weak. Dake did not bring it along, because the magical animals in the club still needed its care. There will be a chance. Dake patted its head and smiled. Forget about the silver competition. Let the gold competition be the Sabega's debut battle. At that time, he could just leave another magic fairy in the club to take care of it. The milk jug was very good at taking care of babies. After the Sabegu received a response, it was clearly excited. "Then let's begin." Dake nodded and took out the curse cage, and Fury 2. "In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the curse cage." He put the Sabegu into the curse cage, then summoned it out and used Fury 2. Under the crimson light, the orange Fury emblem appeared on the Sabega's forehead. It was indeed the same as the little demon beasts, naturally able to adapt to all great sins. And its applicability was obviously higher. Just Great Sin 2 alone was enough to make it evolve. Although it was still in the growth stage, it could evolve into a 3-star magic fairy. This time was no exception. The Sabega's form had undergone a huge change. Its body gradually expanded, and a bun grew out of the back of its head. It wore a blue-gray samurai suit, and a long and narrow samurai sword hung on its waist. Even its eyes became sharp. A new subspecies? Dake looked at the Sabegu that had transformed into a samurai, and was slightly excited. The Sabegu that had evolved with Fury, for the first time frowned, and its eyes were filled with anger. However, its will was strong and was not controlled by Fury. Dake picked up the magic card, injected magic power, and quickly received information. Card name, Samurai Sabegu type, Fairy card, level, Race, Dragon Attribute. Dragon/Combat, Magic Power, 1100, Attack, 1500, Defense, 1300, Ultimate Skill. Super High Speed Text Slash, Super Low Speed Text Slash. If one looked closely they would see the Fury emblem printed on the right chest of the Sabegu suit. In the digital world it called itself the Wandering Super Swordsman. Although this title was created by itself, it did indeed have first-class sword skills. Dake just looked at the samurai sword and knew that it would definitely be able to use the Holy Sword extremely well. Super High Speed Text Slash and Super Low Speed Text Slash. It's understandable that it's high speed, but what's the effect of the low speed? Dake looked at it curiously. Super High Speed Text Slash swings the sword at an extremely high speed. When the attack power breaks through the defense power, it ignores the defense power to kill. Super Low Speed Text Slash swings the sword at an extremely low speed. When the attack power is lower than the opponent's attack power, it will negate the opponent's attack power. An attack move and a counterattack move. The more he thought about it, the more he could discover the power of these two ultimate skills. If he could use these two ultimate skills, the Sabegu could even obtain the ability to kill someone of a higher level. If he could equip the Holy Sword, these two ultimate skills would be even stronger. Of course, the Holy Sword itself was an exception. Equipping the Holy Sword would only make it even more exceptional. Dake's heart moved, and the Sabegu immediately performed. The Sabegu was about to vent and immediately nodded. It walked into the air, pressed its right hand on the hilt of the sword, and focused slightly. In the next moment, a sword shadow suddenly flashed in front of it. Then with a clang, the sword had already returned to its scabbard. From Dake's perspective, he could not even see the shape of the sword clearly. Among all the skills in the world, only speed is unbeatable. Dake quickly asked, "Can you slash again?" The Sabegu beast slowly shook its head and said, 30 seconds. A cooldown of 30 seconds? Only 30 seconds? Dake could not help but ask, "Try the slow sword again." Only then did the Sabegu beast pull out its sword again. This time the sword was extremely slow, but the aura was even more dignified. Its front foot stepped on the ground like a mountain, and it pulled out the sword at an extremely slow speed. Wherever the sword passed, the airflow would surge. Obviously, it was a combination of the concept of 4 ounces to 1,000 pounds. When it finished its performance, Dake asked, 30 seconds too? The Sabegu beast slightly nodded and said in a deep voice, "Yes." There was a hint of depression in its tone, as if there was a volcano hidden in its body that was about to explode. The effect of Fury 2 was very satisfying. After that, Dake let the little demon beast and the multiform monster familiarize themselves with the taste of fury, before ending the experiment for the night. His research on the moonstone refining method had finally reached a juncture. Just in case, he drew 2 points of bliss tonight and continued his research. In the blink of an eye, it was Wednesday afternoon. Dake spent the entire afternoon researching and finally broke through the final bottleneck. He did not hesitate anymore, and after eating some food he began his experiment. This time, the moonstone was refined using the dark magic stone as its model. Due to the uniqueness of the dark magic stone, there were many different details in the refining method. Many of those details were not suitable for the moonstone. Relying on Professor Kazayer's guidance, Dake removed some of those details and replaced them with a more suitable method. Finally, he determined the key elements that assisted the refining process. In other words, magic power and blood. The dark magic stone relied on the magic power and blood of high-level demons as the main materials to refine it. In order to refine it, the same materials were needed to assist the refining process. Although the moonstone wasn't a product of mana and blood, Dark planned to use the moonstone as a raw material and use another method to refine the moonstone into an item card, turning it into an item similar to the dark magic stone. Therefore, the refining process this time was more complicated and more difficult than refining the dark magic stone. He had already mentally prepared himself for the possibility of failure. Just making the softening agent alone took more than an hour. He dripped his own blood and magic power into the softening agent, so that the moonstone could slowly absorb his blood and magic power. This was the key to the refining process. Dake learned a lot from refining the dark magic stone. During the process of the moonstone softening, he completed the creation of the ink and the debugging of the magic language. In the end, he relied on sufficient materials and finally found a path to the final answer after repeated failures. After the moonstone and the other materials were processed, Dake tried to light up the ocean refining array. The refining array floated up like ripples on the surface of the water. He began to inject enough magic power into it and dripped his pre-treated blood. The blood was absorbed as soon as it dripped down, and there was no trace of blood on the surface. Dake picked up the mercury glass rod and gently stirred it in the smooth surface. Then he added the supplementary materials one by one. After making sure there were no mistakes, he put in the moonstone that had a blurry surface. Then he dripped in bliss. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. Dake stopped. However, after the 3 drops of bliss were dripped in, the refining array didn't change much. Only a faint pink glow appeared on the surface. It was like the surface of a lake under the moonlight. It was very calm. Dark looked at the floating moonstone in the center and fell silent for a moment. The 3 drops of bliss didn't seem enough. However, if he continued to invest, the next node would be 7 drops. 7 points was enough to nurture a great sin fruit. If refining a moonstone required 7 drops of bliss, even if the final result was similar to bliss 3, he would only save 3 drops. What if the 7 drops of bliss still weren't enough? Even if he added in the amount he drew last night, he only had 2 drops of bliss left. To make up for the 7 drops, he would need to draw 2 more. If it still wasn't enough, he would suffer a huge loss. So, should he cut his losses in time? Or should he take the risk? That was the problem. If15/127 Next update, 6 a.m. Time to pay off your debt. Chapter 6:13. Should he cut his losses in time, or take the risk? Dake took a deep breath and quickly made a decision. He couldn't choose to cut his losses in time. In the end, what was a loss? If he stopped now, not only would he lose 3 points of bliss and that piece of moonstone, he would never know the results of the experiment. To him, this was the most important thing. If he lost the moonstone, he could buy more. If he lost bliss, he could save more. Only the experiment results had to come out. Therefore, he took advantage of the fact that the reaction of the formation was still relatively stable to temporarily stop. The remaining 2 points of bliss are definitely not enough. I can draw 2 more points tonight. Dake narrowed his eyes and couldn't help but think. Bliss was 92 points at the beginning of the month. After drawing 2 points, he was left with 90 points. However, when he refined the Radiant Night Pearl, the day before yesterday, he accidentally added some bliss, and it was just enough for now. He picked up the magic brain dropper again, and used the soul loss curse and underworld spirit spell to let bliss overflow from his brain. Then he used the dragonfly skimming the water technique to draw a drop of bliss. 1 drop, 2 points. Dake dripped this drop of bliss into the thinking bottle, shook it slightly, and continued the experiment. In order to observe the changes more carefully during the experiment, he would usually draw 1 point per drop. Including the amount I've already drawn, this is already the 4th drop. When this drop of bliss was dripped into the array, the changes on the surface of the light intensified slightly, and circles of ripples gradually appeared. He pondered for a moment, and then dripped the 5th drop. When the 5th drop of bliss fell onto the surface of the light, it was like dripping a drop of hot oil, and the surface of the light suddenly boiled. Dake stared at the array closely, and used his other hand to inject magic into the magic pen to adjust it. He then dripped the 6th drop of bliss. This drop of bliss fell straight down as if it was going to pierce through the surface of the light. It fell to the bottom, and then floated up again. In the blink of an eye, it spread and dissolved, emitting an intense light. Traces of green gradually appeared in the light. The moonstone was completely submerged. Without hesitation, Dake took out the last drop of bliss. The moment bliss touched the light, the green color hidden in the light solidified and formed the emblem of bliss. The radiance of the formation finally reached its peak. Dake finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the blinding light. He couldn't help but smile. Looks like I won the bet. Bliss with 7 points was more than enough. This magic card had entered the final refining stage. The light array that had been refined into an array had completely shrunk to the surface of the magic card, and the internal reaction gradually intensified. Dake's mouth tightened as he watched nervously. Every ending of the magical refinement was like a pay-to-win lottery card. After pressing 10 consecutive buttons, there was no turning back. Fortunately, his luck had always been pretty good when it came to magic refining. The internal reaction of the magic card gradually stabilized, and it was obviously going in a good direction. At this moment, dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door. Dake shrugged and went to open the door. Waiting at the door were the magic elves who had returned early, and Aurora who was wearing gloves and carrying a tray. It wasn't until they felt his mind relax that the enchanted elves knocked on the door. Good evening. Good evening. Dake walked past the magic elves, greeted Aurora, and let them all in. The magic elves walked into the room, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly became lively. Meow, the catnip grass's cries were also lively. Dake asked Aurora to sit at the desk and wait for a while before he returned to the experiment table. At this time, the magic card on the table had stopped reacting and was emitting a stable aura. He used a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card, rinsed it, and brought it in front of him. On the surface of the magic card, there was a stone that was almost the same shape as the moonstone from before. However, other than the shape, the material of the stone seemed to have completely changed. The original moonstone looked like an ordinary stone with a crescent-shaped imprint. However, this moonstone was as clear and transparent as moonlight. From the inside to the outside, it emitted a faint pink halo. Just by holding it in his hand, Dake felt an unusually strong bliss aura from it. That feeling was somewhat similar to Bliss 3, but it was also different. He did not continue to speculate. After he finished observing, he directly injected magic to obtain the information on the card. Card name, Moonstone type, item card. Effect, Charm plus 10, can fully stimulate the moon power in the magic elf's body. Single effect, a full 10 points of charm, but there is no bonus to happiness. While Dake was slightly disappointed, he could not help but let out a sigh of relief. Without the happiness bonus, it meant that he could directly touch this moonstone without worrying about bliss going out of control. Finally, the most important thing was that this moonstone should indeed have an ability similar to the moonstone in Pokemon, which was to complete the evolution of a specific magic elven. However, the specific effects still needed to be tested. From the information, it should only be effective on magic elves with moon power. Among my magic elves, which ones have moon power? Chio Sea Lion, Dream Demon, Demon Fox, Big Milk Can, Fairy Ibu, Miss Vampire. But rather than moon power, these magic elves should have the power of bliss. Even though bliss and moon are closely related, they are still not the same. The most obvious one is the moon god's soul eye. According to bliss and moon power, it is divided into godly personality armament, moon god, and great sin armament, bliss. Speaking of the moon god, it should be the purest moon power that I currently have. However, the moon god's soul eye is not a magic elven, and using the moon god's stone as an analogy to Bliss 3, it should not be enough to strengthen it. Of course, I will only know after I try it out. Dake stretched out his hand and used a normal summoning spell. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summoned the moon god stone. With a trace of coolness, the moon god stone appeared in his palm. He held the stone and carefully felt it, then looked at the magic elves and said, "Who wants to do it?" The magic elves looked at each other. The little demon beast rolled its eyes and immediately volunteered, "I'll do it." Dake nodded and waited for it to fly in front of him. Then he pressed the moon god stone on its forehead. It was like equipping a weapon. The moon god stone released a strong light. It was slightly different from Bliss 3, as light. The light released by the moon god stone was purer and more inclined towards moonlight. However, under the illumination of the moonlight, The little fiendish magical beast still evolved. The skull pattern on its forehead turned into the emblem of bliss, and its entire body turned into light as the light grew brighter. When the light disappeared, it had turned into a cat with black fur. It still evolved into a Hadalu beast. Dake let out a sigh of relief. Being able to make the little demon beast evolve into a Hadalu beast meant that this refinement was not a loss. He did save 3 points of bliss. He looked at the stats of the Hadalu beast and found that it was no different from the Bliss 3's evolution. It could be seen that this moon god stone still contained enough bliss, and the 3 points it lacked were made up by other factors. It showed that it leaned towards the moon force, which meant that its moon force was stronger than bliss. Dake's brain worked quickly, and he finally caught that moment of inspiration. His eyes were filled with excitement, and he had more expectations for this moon god stone. Good. After evolving into a Hadalu beast, the little demon beast was obviously more convenient when it came to snatching supper. Dake observed its reaction and found that it was very good at suppressing bliss's influence on its emotions. It could be seen that the moon god stone had a slight advantage in this aspect. However, after 15 minutes, the Hadalu beast still degenerated into a little demon beast. There's no obvious improvement in the evolution time? Dake couldn't help but frown. These 15 minutes seemed to be a fixed time limit for the evolution, and it would fluctuate by 1 or 2 minutes at most. After eating supper and sending Aurora off, the cooldown of the moon god stone was reset. Dake didn't experiment on the magic fairies this time. Just as he said before, he didn't have any Pokemon like Pippi and Fatty Ko that needed to use moon god stone to evolve, nor did he have any digitals like Moon God Beast, that obviously used Moon Force as its core. He only had Moon God Soul Eye in his hands. If he had to add one, he could only add Moon Ivan, that Ivan had evolved into. However, that was an experiment that needed to be done in the future. Right now, he just wanted to see if this Moon God Stone had an effect on the evolved Moon God that exceeded Bliss 3. Although Moon God's personality equipment was abnormally powerful, it was actually only a 6-star second-tier magic fairy. It was refined using the warrior's soul as a template. In theory, it should be the same as the warrior's soul, having human form, beast form, and a hybrid that evolved from human form and beast form. Human form was mature, beast form was complete, and hybrid form was the ultimate form. If exchanged for magic fairies, it would be second, third, fourth, and above. Since this moon god stone contained a higher level of moon force than bliss, Dake guessed that it might be able to display an effect similar to bliss when targeted at a specific magic fairy that used moon force as its core. If the experiment on Moon God was successful this time, it would be a great success. It would most likely mean that this moon god stone could also allow Pippi, Fatty Ko, and other specific Pokemon to evolve to the 3rd tier. The meaning was extraordinary. It meant that under certain circumstances, just by relying on 7 points of bliss, he could display the effect of 30 points of bliss. In this way, he would not only save 3 points of bliss, but a total of 23 points of bliss. The more Dake thought about it, the more excited he became. He immediately summoned the moon god's soul to his side. The moon god's soul walked behind him with a lazy expression. Its slender arms wrapped around his neck, half hugging his body. Dake used his index and middle fingers to hold the moon god's soul eye, placed it in front of his chest and whispered, "The gathered prayers shall become a new silver moon. Become a shining silver moon, armed evolution moon god." As a large amount of magic power was poured in, the moon god's soul's body was tightly attached to it from the back until it completely merged. His body was enveloped by the silver light, and he gradually turned into a glowing body. When the silver-white armor clung to his skin and covered his body, he could feel the energy in his body constantly subliming, gradually covering the other energies, causing his armor to evolve into a 6-star magic elf. Moon God. He didn't immerse himself in this feeling of power. After the 3-second cooldown was over, he took out the moon god stone and began to chant a normal summoning spell. When the moon god stone appeared in his hand, he slowly pressed it into the heart protection mirror on his chest. Then, A dazzling silver radiance burst out from the heart protection mirror, gradually devouring his body that had been armed and evolved. He once again entered the glowing body state, and his body continued to change under the light of evolution. This time, the change was even more intense than when he had just evolved into the moon god. The magic fairies all stared at him without blinking. They only felt that their master was even more charming than before. The explosive increase in power was intoxicating. Dake was immersed in the process of evolution. His mind suddenly floated, and he looked at himself from a god's perspective. The silver armor that originated from the moon god armor separated from his body and floated in the air again. The armor on his head changed into the shape of a beast, and the armor on his limbs grew sharp claws. The armor became thicker and thicker, and it was filled with power. Behind him, a long silver metal tail suddenly elongated and whipped in the air. He suddenly opened his arms, and all the armor stuck close to him. Roar! It was as if a roar was born from the bottom of his heart. Dake's feet landed on the ground, and an unprecedented feeling of power filled his body. He tried to take a step forward, and his whole body suddenly rushed forward, stopping in front of the full-body mirror. After a short moment of surprise, he turned around and looked at the mirror. What was reflected in the mirror was a huge beast form that was more than 2.5 meters tall. There was a huge difference between the evolution of the beast form and the human form. The human form's armor was thin and delicate, making the moon god slender and nimble. The beast form's armor was abnormally thick, and it was tall and mighty, exuding a cold and murderous aura. Dake observed carefully and found that the helmet should belong to a cat. It was just that the ears had shrunk into layers of triangular structures that extended backward. It was difficult to recognize under the silver metal structure. Only the chin of the face was exposed, but it was still the chin of a human. But the upper and lower armor had fangs that were aligned. And in the middle of the body, there was still the heart protection mirror that was engraved with mysterious runes. But this heart protection mirror was obviously thicker as the armor became thicker. The claws on both hands were as sharp as blades. It was the same for both feet. The silver steel tail behind him was a structure that was pieced together, like a long steel whip. With a thought, the steel tail suddenly elongated, and it could actually stretch out at will. He slightly exerted force in his legs, and his entire huge body floated in the air. He could still run in the air. Phew, he took a deep breath. Dake quickly suppressed the bestial nature that was brought about by the sudden increase in power, and felt the changes in his body with a calmer mind. Card name: Night Tiger God. God personality armament. Type: Elf card. Level: Race: Fantasy God Seed. Attribute: Dark Magic Power 3500. Attack: 4000. Defense: 3500. Ultimate Skill: God personality armament. Moonwheel mirror rotation. Moon Tiger God descent. Night Tiger God? It seems that the form of this armament is a tiger. After Moon God transformed from human form to beast form, it successfully broke through the barrier from the second to the third step. However, the 7-star level meant that it was not in its complete state. Under normal circumstances, it should have waited until Moon God Soul Eye absorbed more divinity from the source and upgraded from Moon God Soul Eye to Moon God Soul 2, and Moon God Armament could evolve from human form to beast form. At that time, Night Tiger God, God Personality Armament, S-star level was very likely to be 9. However, Moon Godstone only used 7 points of bliss. It was already an unexpected surprise to have this effect, and he could not pursue it too much. Dake focused and continued to feel. Night Tiger God, God Personality Armament, was still a fantasy god seed, and it had divinity. Its attribute was dark, and there was no change. However, there was a huge increase in its 3 sizes. The original Moon God, God Personality Armament S3 attributes were all perfect, but it did not break through. They were all 3000 points. However, after being upgraded by 1 star, Night Tiger God, God Personality Armament S3 attributes were above 7 stars, and there was an additional 500 points of attack. In addition to the Moon God Armament's ultimate skill, God Personality Armament, Night Tiger God S3 sizes could be increased to a terrifying extent. Divine Personality Armament. Passive skill. The Divine Personality Armament possesses the power of God. Not only can it grant the wearer greater power, but it can also raise the wearer's status, rendering most of the transformation-type killing moves targeted at the wearer ineffective. Magic Power plus 1000. Attack plus 1000. Defense plus 1000. Hypostasis plus 1. The effects of God Personality Armament did not need to be mentioned. The original ultimate skill Moon God Mirror of Moon God had been transformed into Full Moon Mirror Spin. Full Moon Mirror Spin. The Moon God Mirror embedded in the chest can absorb moonlight and transform its power into its own magic power. This allows God Personality Armament, Night Tiger God, to not consume its wearer's magic power in the dark. Even during the day, the wearer can use the power of moonlight stored in the Moon God Mirror to maintain the consumption of the armament. When necessary, the wearer can release all the power of moonlight stored in the Moon God Mirror, causing the Night Tiger God's armor to become a complete mirror. Within 30 seconds, it can completely block and reflect the opponent's attack, and it will not be affected by most ultimate skills. This change, Dake's eyes were filled with shock. He would never have thought that the Moon God Mirror, which could only stand still, would gain the ability to move after evolving into beast form. It also gained the ability to reflect attacks. Although the so-called complete block was limited by the power of the moon stored in the Moon God Mirror, he had experimented before, and the threshold was frighteningly high. The Night Tiger God, in mirror form, was almost invincible for 30 seconds. The strength of Night Tiger God was so high that it was shocking. Is this the strength of a god card? Dake was shocked. Although this Night Tiger deity was only 7 stars for the time being, the 4 sure kill techniques were all present. The first 2 ultimate skills were enough to support its status as a god card. The last 2 ultimate skills were a further explanation of its strength. Moon Tiger God's Descent. Summon Moon Tiger. Moon Tiger has double the attack and defense of Night Tiger God, and 1/10 of its magic power. It can last for 30 seconds. Under the moonlight, the duration can be doubled. On a full moon night, the duration can be doubled. Moon Tiger Roar. Night Tiger God condenses the power of moonlight and shoots out a tiger-shaped shockwave. If Moon Tiger descends, it can be released simultaneously. It's too strong. Thousands of words turned into a single exclamation. With the Night Tiger God, in its armor form, the Moon God Soli was truly a god card that surpassed the limit. Its strength was not fake at all. It was completely reflected in the solid data. Moreover, the Moon God Soli was unimaginably versatile. As a super core magic card in the Bliss series, its existence seemed to be to end duels. With this magic card, the Silver Cup had lost its meaning. The Gold Cup was the real stage. Dake looked out of the window. The moonlight was slanted and scattered on the balcony. It was exceptionally bright. He could not help but want to fly into the night sky and test the power of Moon Tiger God's Descent and Moon Tiger Roar. However, it was late at night and it was not suitable for that. He could only suppress the excitement in his heart and slowly deactivate the Moon God's Soli summon. When he degenerated from the Night Tiger God state, the curious onlookers immediately surrounded him. Dake saw the Diru beast frowning, the little devil beast's eyes shining, and the demonic fox beast smiling. As expected, the Diru beast walked closer and asked, "This new armor evolution is also exclusive to Bliss?" Dake sensed the disappointment in her tone, but he still said, "Indeed." The demonic fox beast smiled even more. The fairy Ibu jumped into Dake's arms skillfully and used the ribbon to wrap around his arm. Unlike the little devil and Ibu, who needed to use the Elysium series cards to level up or evolve before they could use the Moon God Armed Evolution. Their Elysium magic elves could use the Moon God Armed Evolution in their initial state. This meant that each of them had the opportunity to evolve into a Night Tiger God. They could also use this opportunity to show themselves on the stage of high-end duels. Previously, there was only pride, and not bliss, which made them feel suffocated. Now there was finally a replacement. However, the experiment with the Moon Godstone was not over yet. Dake sat down to organize the experience he had gained. He only started the next experiment when it was close to midnight. He first used Bliss 3 Moon to evolve Fantasy Beast, Ibu into Fantasy Beast, Moon Ibu, and then used Moon God Stone on it. After that, it indeed improved further. Card name, Fantasy Beast Moon Ibu. Type, Fairy card, level. Race Bird Beast, attribute, Evil, magic power, 2500, attack, 2400, defense, 3000, killing skills, Moonlight Evil Wave Shadow Ball Hell Stab just like the incomplete Pride, that allowed Illusory Beast, Ivan to evolve into a 6-star Illusory Beast, Sun Ivan. This Moon God Stone could do the same. It was just that the procedure was a little more troublesome. It needed Bliss 3, Moon as a foreshadowing. After that, as long as he used Moon God Stone on Fantasy Beast, Ibu, without Bliss 3, Moon as a foreshadowing, he could get a specific reference. However, Dake was more or less sure that it was useless. Fantasy Beast, Moon Ibu was a specific target for the Moon God Stone. Fantasy Beast, Ibu was not. If he used Moon God Stone on Fantasy Beast, Ibu, there was a high probability that it would evolve into a 4-star, Fantasy Beast, Moon Ibu. As for the 6-star Fantasy Beast, Moon Ibu, compared to the 4-star Fantasy Beast, Moon Ibu, what kind of huge improvement did it have? Other than the huge increase in its 3 attributes, it should have obtained a 4th killing skill. Hell Stab. Hell Stab, after hitting the opponent, inflict a huge amount of damage and inflict a hellish pain on the opponent. Lasts for 2 rounds. During these 2 rounds, the opponent who is unable to withstand the pain will be unable to make a sound, unable to release a killing skill, and unable to move. Based on the opponent's ability to withstand pain, Hell Stab's effect was limited. However, it could still be used as a restrictive killing skill, especially when it was used against living beings with normal senses. Magic elves had a certain degree of pain reduction, so they were able to withstand pain. Therefore, most of them would be affected, but not to the extent of being unable to move. As for the specific degree of effect, there were differences. Dake put away the magic card and practiced underworld magic for half an hour as usual before quickly falling asleep. It was early Thursday morning, and it was snowing with small fish outside. After washing up, Dake sat in front of the study table, picked up little Ibu, and used Moon God Stone on it. Then, the conjecture he made last night was slapped in the face on the spot. Epsilon hashtag, // Illusory Beast, Ibu evolved into a 6-star, Illusory Beast, Moon Ibu after using Moon God Stone. Ibu is really a magical life form. Dake touched his cheek and couldn't help but sigh. In fact, most of the Ibus needed to be fossilized to evolve to the next stage. However, Moon Ibu, Sun Ibu, and Fairy Ibu were exceptions, which caused him to make a misjudgment. He didn't expect Illusory Beast, Ibu, to be the target of Moon God Stone. However, this was undoubtedly a good thing. He took out his notebook, crossed out the line of conjecture regarding this matter, and wrote a new conclusion. In short, the refining of Moon God Stone was an unprecedented success. He couldn't wait to go to the mission hall and put up the Moon God Stone, a bounty mission, and let the 2 sisters put up a buying sign in the shop. Even though Moon God Stones were very rare, they could still be found in the Shungmalian Academy. He didn't ask for much, just 2 more pieces. Just 2. Greed +1. After successfully refining the Moonstone into a Moonstone, Dark had undoubtedly made a breakthrough in the research of item cards. There was a big difference between refining Moon God Stone and Dark Magic Stone, and it could be said that he had already broken away from the category of copying. The next treasures that needed to be refined into item cards were Bronze Mirror, Wood Carving, and Clown Mask. Therefore, he speculated that Clown Mask would still need Bliss, but he didn't have any in stock, so he decided to put it aside for the time being. Bronze Mirror was an imitation of Medusa's mirror, and it could petrify things that were directly in front of it. If he were to refine it into an item card, he would need Greed, which was symbolized by Saturn, so he could give it a try. But considering that he would be entering the dungeon the next afternoon, Dake decided to refine the Wood Carving into a substitute puppet first. After the alchemy class ended, there were less than 24 hours left. He wasn't sure if he could refine it, so he could only try his best. Anyway, let's prepare for the alchemy class. Dake rubbed his temples and left the classroom. Professor Kazair finally started teaching the specifics of alchemy in this alchemy class. Even though it was the most basic part, he had to make full use of Eye of Truth to identify the alchemy materials and refine them into items of equivalent value. The students present were talented and intelligent, so they learned and applied the knowledge very quickly. Dake wasn't outstanding among them. The intense learning atmosphere led to healthy competition, and everyone was very serious, which was disadvantageous to Dake. He tried to find ways to slack off and was exhausted. After the alchemy class ended, Dake was already quite tired. He brought his textbooks to the library, registered with Bella, and entered the library reading room to finish the homework that he had left behind for the past few days. When Panduola finally came to change shifts, Dake put down his pen and paper and walked over. It was already noon. Good afternoon, senior. Dake walked in from the backstage and sat down beside Panduola. Panduola looked at him and smiled. What's up? Are you here to ask about the method to refine a substitute puppet? Dake put the notebook on the table and nodded. Yes, how did you know? Panduola rolled her eyes at him and said, Don't I know you well? You never look for me if you have nothing to do. Dake said awkwardly, I'm busy, aren't I? Forget it. Panduola tapped the book on the table. Actually, I'm very busy too. Let's go in and out quickly and finish earlier. Dake rubbed his nose and said, I might be a little slow. Panduola turned around and said, The difficulty of refining a substitute puppet is actually just that. You have a good grasp of the magic language, and you've been researching item card creation recently, so the basic requirements are complete. Moreover, the difficulty of refining a substitute puppet is mostly focused on the creation of the original embryo, but you already have a ready-made one. Dake took out the wooden carving from his bag and put it on the table. Is this wooden carving very rare? Panduola nodded and said, It is indeed very rare. I've been in the academy for so long, and I've only obtained 2. One of them exploded during the refining process. That's why there's only one substitute puppet magic card. Dake nodded. So it seems that I have to be prepared for this to be my only chance? Panduola said. That's not necessarily the case. If you can find a treasure chest, you can always open a second or third one. Alright, let's not talk nonsense. Bring the pen and paper over, and we'll start explaining. Dake moved the notebook and pen over and leaned over. The fragrance that entered his nose made his heart palpitate a little, and he quickly focused his attention on the notebook. Panduola picked up the pen and leaned over to write as she explained. Her explanation was, of course, more detailed and easier to understand than in the 3,000 item cards and 8,000 methods of refining. She also predicted some of the points that Dake would make mistakes in advance, and wrote down the key points to avoid in the notebook. In just 2 or 3 hours, she had completely explained the refining method of the substitute puppet, without holding back at all. Dake listened attentively, but because Panduola spoke too quickly, there were still some parts that he couldn't digest. Therefore, after thanking her, he went to the quiet reading room to study further. During this time, unless he encountered a difficult problem that he couldn't understand, he relied on himself to research and solve it. Finally, he had a rough idea before dark. From the looks of it, I might be able to make it in time? Dake put away the pen and paper and stood up. When he walked out of the reading room, he realized that Panduola was no longer at the counter. In Shungmalian Academy, especially the top students, they were indeed very busy. They would set up topics for themselves, and after the old topics were thoroughly researched, they would immediately have a new topic. Participating in the competition and stepping onto the dueling stage might be a form of relaxation for them. Dake left the library and went to the cafeteria. Tonight, there was still the astrology class. Ding ding ding. At 9 o'clock sharp, the astrology class ended. Dake went downstairs to the Magical Animals Society, entered the president's office, and began to write his personal, substitute puppet magic language. Other than the wood-carving prototype, the other difficulty of creating the substitute puppet was the magic language. He still needed to write 2 sets of the magic language. One set had to be engraved on the wood carving, and the other set had to be used in the forging process. Although he had the template that Panduola had taught him, Dake still encountered difficulties in the process of writing. While he was puzzled, he thought of Katrina in the reading room, so he took out his notebook and asked her. Katerina only took a brief look and pointed out his mistake, which made him realize what he was doing. He quickly returned to the office and continued to write. After he left, Katrina had a strange look on her face and whispered, "Is he starting to forge the substitute puppet already? Should I also get a couple of magic cards to practice?" Late at night, there was a sudden downpour. Dake and the others were stuck in the club classroom, so they stayed a little longer. It wasn't until after 10 o'clock that they rushed into the castle, braving the lighter rain. That night, Dake didn't dare to stay up late, so he quickly fell asleep. The next day was Friday, and the weather turned sunny. Dake woke up full of energy and continued his research. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the final programming was finally completed. He seized the time and immediately began to forge. The materials in the dormitory were basically complete, and everything was ready. He called Meow Meow over, and had it carve the magic language that had already been written on the wood carving. Meow Meow picked up the carving knife and played with it. Then, it nodded and began to carve as fast as the wind. Dark glanced at him, and felt ashamed of his inferiority. However, when he remembered that Meow Meow was his, and that Meow Meow's craftsmanship was equal to his craftsmanship, he became happy again. Recently, Meow Meow, Snorlax, Kettle Kettle, Big Milk Can, and other magic elves with special abilities were very popular in the Shungmalian Academy's mission system. Occasionally, people would even visit them directly and personally entrust them with missions. The mission points of the Magical Animals Society had increased without him noticing. The forging process of the substitute puppet was very smooth. Every small problem that he encountered along the way seemed to be solved in the notebook. Dake's ability to forge item cards also improved rapidly, and he gradually became more proficient in the forging process. According to Panduola's forging process, when he placed the wood carving into the ocean forging array, he dripped his own blood into it. When the blood was mixed in, the substitute puppet was completely connected to the magus. If it was placed close to the magus, the substitute puppet would automatically trigger when the magus felt danger above a certain threshold. While taking the damage for the magus, it would also trigger the blink incantation and teleport the magus to a nearby location. If it was used on a magic elf, it would need to be equipped on the magic elf in advance. Drip! Suddenly, a drop of liquid fell from the ceiling. Dake was caught off guard, and could only watch as the drop of liquid fell into the forging array. Then the entire forging process came to an end and quickly ended. He suddenly raised his head and saw little Lily, who had drilled half of its body out of the ceiling. His face immediately darkened. "Hey!" Professor Lily Laplace flipped down from the ceiling, patted her skirt gently and said with a smile, "I'm sorry. Why are you pulling a long face? Didn't you already refine this substitute puppet?" Dake lowered his head to look at the magic card and sighed in relief. In any case, this substitute puppet was indeed in the final stage of self-forging, and it was basically completed. He turned his head and asked, "Have you been here for a long time?" Lily floated beside him, and looked at his dorm with wide eyes and high spirits. I'm here. I've been waiting for a long time. A 16 of 127, aho greater than over equal to x, oh. Although but. I beg for monthly votes. Chapter 6:14. Lily turned around and said, "Sarah asked me to bring you there. We need to make some preparations in advance." Dake asked curiously, "Have you confirmed the members for the dungeon exploration this time?" Yes, Lily said excitedly. Sarah, Pawa, Claire, Kazair, and Nini. Professor Nini? Dake could not help but feel puzzled. Although they were all familiar faces and made him feel at ease. How did Professor Nini get in? Also, Professor Katzer didn't know about this until the night before yesterday, right? Could it be that it was just confirmed yesterday? Dake's mind was full of doubts, but he felt that it was impolite to ask Lily. He shook his head and looked back at the experiment table. The scapegoat puppet card had stopped responding. He picked it up with a pair of tweezers, washed it, and looked at it carefully. He remembered the website. VIP can't you? 6 There was a puppet in the scapegoat puppet card, but this puppet was very different from the original wood carving. It moved around in the card unconsciously, and was no longer in the cross-legged position like the wood carving. And the face that was originally just an outline had become more delicate, and one could see Dake's own shadow in it. After the scapegoat puppet was refined, only the enchanter himself and the enchanter that he refined could use it. This kind of special enchanter card, even without the thinking lock, did not have to worry about being taken away by others. Dake looked carefully and suddenly frowned. He found that on the back of the puppet, although it was not obvious, there were indeed a few lines of transparent wings. He could not help but look up at Professor Li. The direction of the lines was exactly the same as Li's wings. Li blinked with an innocent face. Dake took a deep breath, lowered his head helplessly, and continued to look at the enchanter card. After he injected magic, there was a message feedback. This scapegoat puppet was indeed a problem. Card name, Fairy Puppet Type, Item Card Effect. The fairy puppet can take damage in place of its master at critical moments and instantly activate the flicker incantation to teleport its master to a nearby location. At the same time, special summon a fairy-type magic elf needs to be recorded in advance. Dake was silent for a while, then raised his head and stared at Li for a while. Suddenly, he patted Li's shoulder with a gratified expression and praised, "Well done!" This fairy puppet had a special summoning ability under the foundation of substitute puppet. Although the special summoned arcane fairy had to be a fairy species, there was no doubt that it greatly increased its practicality, especially in a magician duel. Moreover, this kind of special summoning, as long as the conditions were met, could basically be directly summoned across ranks. In short, he didn't know about the third-tier magic guide fairies, but the second-tier magic guide fairies might be specially recruited. The only problem was that he only had one fairy species magic elf card in his hand. Moreover, it was the magician's secretary, who didn't have any combat ability, but it didn't matter. With the compatibility between the fairy species and Bliss, it was only a matter of time before he could create a few fairy species. For example, Pippi and Fatty were both fairy species and the target of the Moon Godstone. If he could create these types of magic guide fairies, it would be a relatively perfect addition to the Bliss deck. With a new goal in mind, Dake suddenly became cheerful. In the name of Dake Dimming, magician summon, fairy puppet. After being summoned, the transparent wings of the fairy puppet became even more obvious. Dake summoned the magician secretary and used the fairy puppet to record it. After the recording was completed, a small projection of a magic book appeared on the fairy puppet's card surface, which was very interesting. However, because this type of magic guide card usually had a cooldown of 24 hours, Dake didn't experiment on the spot. After he recalled the fairy puppet, he quickly tidied up the remnants of the experiment. Professor Li took the opportunity to float into the bedroom and stroll around. After Dake finished tidying up, she said, "Is it done? Shall we leave when it's done?" Dake walked to the bedside and smiled as he said, "Wait, let me make some preparations." "What preparations?" Lily said as she patted her chest. "Lily is here." "That's true." As Dake spoke, he quickly picked up the backpack at the bedside and put in some necessities for adventuring in the dungeon. Although he already had a 1 cubic meter dungeon storage box, it could only be opened in the dungeon. He had to enter the dungeon before he could put in his backpack and other items. In the end, he recalled all the magic guide fairies in the dorm and said to Professor Li, "Shall we go to the society first?" Lily asked curiously, "Do you have anything to bring?" Dake picked up 3 kitty grass and said, "Send them over." Other than the kitty grass, there was also the worm tree in the dorm, but he had already watered it with magic potions. If the weather changed, the Sabega beast would come and take care of it, so there wouldn't be any major problems. Lily looked at the kitty grass in his arms and leaned over to hold his arm. She said, "Shall we go?" Dake nodded slightly. Lily stepped forward and released magic power to surround the two of them. Then the two of them turned into phantoms and blurred in an instant as they moved forward in the void. Dake only saw a blur before he was already in front of the society's classroom. He pushed open the door and entered. The magic guide fairies in the society's classroom were also ready. Dake handed the kitty grass to the Sabega beast and comforted the little girl. Then he walked into the study room and grabbed the little bear cub. "Are we going?" Shirley Augustine nervously wrote on the photocopied book. It had been almost half a month since it was brought out of the underground city. To be honest, it had gradually gotten used to its life in the Magical Animals Society. Even though it sometimes felt like it was a frog that was soaked in warm water and would be cooked and eaten one day, it didn't feel like it was a frog that had been soaked in warm water. But this month's life had been too comfortable. Other than Dake, who sometimes came to chat with it, the professors in the academy didn't come to find it at all. The other members of the Magical Animals Society also treated it well, and the magic guide fairies didn't reject it. Sometimes, it could even mix in with Dake's magic guide fairies and go into the castle for a stroll. In short, it lived a comfortable life of eating and sleeping, lying down and reading books every day. It wasn't as frightened as it was in the underground city. Even in the depths of its memory, when it lived in the ice tower, it had never been so free. It had always been carrying shackles, and the only difference was that they were loose and tight. So now that it was about to return to the underground city, it suddenly felt a little afraid. Therefore, when Dake nodded at it, it suddenly asked, "Can I still come back?" Dake was stunned for a moment, and he was caught off guard by the sudden change in the little bear cub's attitude. So he said, "Aren't you living in fear here every day? Once the investigation is clear, we can let you go back." Shirley Augustine suddenly became nervous, but it didn't show any expression on the book. Instead, it pretended to be calm and wrote frowny face. "So it's like this. Don't you want to know more about the Northern Kingdom? I only told you 1% of the story." Dake shook his head and said, "I won't force you." Shirley's tone was stagnant, and she couldn't say anything. "Are you still not done?" The little fairy's urging voice came in. Dake grabbed the little bear cub's armpits, lifted it up, and carried it out of the study room. After that, Dark repeatedly told the Subgoo beast a few words, and once again promised it that he would let it enter the golden cup. Only then did he leave with Professor Lily. A few minutes later, Dake was sitting in Professor Shirfa's office. A few professors who were about to enter the underground city had gathered in the room. Professor Shirfa sat on the main seat of the sofa, and Professor Pawa Cheong-si and Claire Kate sat on both sides. Professor Nini moved a small stool and sat at the side. Dake, Professor Kaze, and Professor Lily sat together. The little bear cub was placed on the tea table, and its expression was stiff as it endured the gazes of the professors. "Is this the demonic creature?" Professor Pawa Cheong-si crossed his arms and raised his brows, revealing a strong murderous aura. The little bear cub shivered and moved towards Dake. Professor Shirfa glared at Professor Cheong-si and said, "Don't scare it. I've already told you about Shirley Augustine. There's an unknown change happening in the underground city. We think that it's a strange phenomenon that can awaken the magical beast. The ultimate goal of this underground city exploration is to find out the cause of this strange phenomenon." "How do we find it?" Professor Cheong-si asked bluntly. Professor Shirfa said calmly, "Go to level 11 of the underground city and see if Shirley's hidden room is still there." "You can't find it, right?" Professor Cheong-si looked at the little bear and said, "Once a hidden room or boss room has been conquered, it will be refreshed." The little bear cub pricked up its ears and lifted the photocopy that Dake gave it. As magic power poured in, its thoughts turned into words and were displayed on the photocopied book. "Is it really gone?" Professor Shirfa thought that it was sad that its home was gone, so he comforted it and said, "This is the dungeon's refresh rule, but you're different. Perhaps your birthplace hasn't been refreshed. Even if it has been refreshed, you can dig a tree hole at the original location." The little bear cub shook its head and wrote in large words on the photocopy frowny face, "It's okay." Professor Sylph nodded. "Anyway, let's go to the 11th floor first, and then to the 32nd floor. That's your floor when you were a boss, right?" The little bear cub said. Yes, Professor Shierfa said. If we can't find any clues in these 2 levels, we can only rely on Ka-Zair. Professor Kazel put down the teacup in his hand and said, when the time comes, leave it to me. Professor Shierfa nodded and said, we don't have much free time. It's best to settle everything this weekend. Professor Shierfa didn't come up with a specific plan, but Dake felt that it was trustworthy. He glanced at Professor Ka-Zair and realized the source of his confidence. Is this why Professor Shierfa invited Professor Ka-Zair to join us? Although Professor Ka-Zair was short, he had great wisdom. With him around, there was a sense of confidence that everything could be done. Dake sipped his black tea, and the nervousness in his heart disappeared. He didn't have any other intentions in entering the dungeon. He just wanted to have a good rest. If the phenomenon that caused the magical creatures to awaken was related to God, he would like to see it. As for the breakthrough of the great sin, he had temporarily put that at the back of his mind. After all, everything was unknown, and blind pursuit was greed. Though he was excited, he still restrained himself. Professor Shierfa talked about the important points to take note of when entering the dungeon. Then he took out a magic conducting card and tapped on the corner of the table. Green light flowed out from the surface of the card, spreading out the entire tabletop at a very fast speed. A green napkin with a little floral pattern appeared in the air. Professor Shierfa continued to infuse mana into the napkin, and balls of light were squeezed out from the napkin. The balls of light gradually turned into bread, fresh fruits, vegetable soup, and other bland foods. Though it's not as good as Cynthia's, my gourmet card can fill your stomach. A rare smile appeared on Professor Sylph's face. Just eat something. We'll set off. If they entered the dungeon before midnight, they could avoid being noticed by the students. However, when she put away the magic card, Professor Nini suddenly swallowed her saliva. Her voice was very loud. Professor Sylph realized that she had been careless. At this time, Claire smiled and said, Professor, your taste is too light. She took out a Gourmet Series magic conducting card and tapped on the table. A layer of light spread out, and plates of meat were stacked high on the table. The rich aroma spread out and made people salivate. Professor Nini's eyes lit up, and she couldn't wait to reach out her hand. But she was restrained in front of so many professors. Although she had reached out her hand, she didn't dare to take it. She only blinked her eyes and looked at the professors. Dake smiled and picked up a fruit. He asked curiously, Aunt Claire, can the food produced by the magic conducting card provide the necessary nutrients for the human body? Of course not. Claire placed the cutlery on the table and said, but they can provide the necessary energy, and the taste is good. They can satisfy one's appetite. Dake had an idea. So no matter how much I eat, I don't have to worry about getting fat? Claire paused for a while and said, that's right. But the human body needs more than just energy. All kinds of nutrients are indispensable, so it's okay to eat them occasionally but not as a staple. Dake nodded and had a preliminary understanding of the gourmet cards. The gourmet card was a type of item card. Although most of them didn't help improve the strength of a mage, they could improve their lives, especially when they were adventuring outside. Therefore, they were quite popular. But even if the difficulty of making the gourmet card was eliminated, the first condition for a mage to make a gourmet card was that they had mastered the cooking method of those gourmet dishes. In other words, Principal Cynthia St. Erdii, who always used the gourmet cards to fill the banquet hall on the first floor, was a real chef. Dake waved the fruit at Professor Nini and took a bite. Professor Nini's eyes lit up. She finally plucked up the courage to pick up the meat bone at the top of the plate and ate it in small bites. With this as the beginning, the professors, Dake and Cub, also began to eat. At about 11:30, everyone was full and ready to go. Professor Shierfu raised his wand and said to Dake and the others who were standing in the middle of the office, "Ready, let's go." In an instant, a gust of wind whistled and swept toward the entrance of the dungeon like a wind dragon. In the square where the 12 colossal statues stood, the gust of wind whistled and fell to the ground. The dissipating wind swept the dust in all directions. 7 people and 1 bear appeared in front of the 20-meter-tall arched door. Professor Shierfu walked out of the line and tapped the door pillar with his wand. A huge amount of magic surged out and formed a magic door like a water curtain between the pillars. Before entering, she said again. Lily after entering, stay by Dake's side and don't run around. Her safety is your responsibility. Professor Lily immediately pouted and said, How many times have I told you? Professor Shi-Erfu shook his head and turned to Professor Nini. Nini, after entering, remember to listen to Professor Kazair and don't run around. Do you understand? Yes, yes, yes. Professor Nini immediately nodded like a chick pecking at rice. The difference between Little Fairy and Little Behemoth was immediately apparent. Dake couldn't help but laugh. The other professors also revealed heartwarming smiles. Professor Shi-Erfu said seriously, Be serious. The dungeon will reveal its evil intentions when you let your guard down. After she finished speaking, she focused slightly, raised her foot, and stepped into the magic door. After her body passed through the magic door, the other professors entered one by one. At this moment, Dake had a clearer understanding of this impromptu expedition team. In the team, Professor Shi-Erfu was the obvious leader and the team leader. Professor Pawacheong-si was the main vanguard, and was responsible for defeating all enemies. Claire Kate was the center back and formed a connection with Professor Cheong-si. Professor Kazair was naturally the think tank, although he wasn't responsible for the deployment of the team. As for Professor Li and Professor Nini, they were the bodyguards of Dake and Kazair, respectively. As for Dake dimming himself, to put it nicely, he was being protected. To put it bluntly, of course, he wasn't completely useless. He was responsible for looking after Little Bear. The King of Thailand, King of Thailand, King of Thailand, King of Thailand, King of Thailand. After a while, 7 people and 1 bear arrived in front of the magic marker in the reception hall on the first level of the dungeon. Professor Shi-Erfu decisively took out a door crystal and activated it in front of the magic marker. It was different from the door key, which could only create a mana ring. After the door crystal was activated, it created a genuine teleport portal. Professor Shi-Erfu had made sufficient preparations for this expedition. Dake stuffed his backpack into the dungeon storage box while he curiously observed the teleport portal that was activated by the door crystal. Judging from the surface area of the portal, it was actually not very big. It was a single-sided door that was about 23 meters tall and 45 meters wide. In short, with Professor Nini's physique, it was impossible for her to enter. But the professors didn't have any reaction. It was obvious that the teleport portal created by the door crystal had the same structure as the door key's mana ring. There was no need to enter. As expected, Professor Shi-Erfu took the lead. She extended her hand into the teleport portal and was suddenly sucked in. The closer her body was to the center of the portal, the smaller she became. After passing through the portal, she returned to her original size. Let's go. Lily pulled Dake's hand and walked over excitedly. Then she patted the teleport portal. When she was sucked into the teleport portal, Dake was also pulled in. In the blink of an eye, they passed through the teleport portal and arrived in front of the mana marker on the 11th level. Dake looked at the statue of the female swordsman and asked curiously, Professor Li, are the mana markers in the dungeon guest hall unchanged? Lily pulled him away and said, Basically they are unchanged, but there are exceptions. Anyway, it's hard for you to encounter them. Dake nodded and started thinking about what would happen after he encountered them. Equals after everyone passed through the portal, Professor Shi-Erfu kept the door crystal, 1/1, and asked Little Bear, Shirley Augustine, do you remember where you lived? Little Bear raised the photocopy and displayed. I remember a little, but the terrain has changed. As long as you know the direction, Professor Shi-Erfu said. Little Bear. I'll try my best. With Professor Pawacheong-si in front and the rest at the back, they entered the 11th level. Despite the refresh, the overall style of the 11th level didn't change much. It was still a tropical rainforest theme. After the group entered, they were swallowed by the huge vegetation in the blink of an eye. The towering trees shot up to the sky, and the canopies were like clouds. Tall shrubs, flowers, and plants were everywhere. Man-eating flowers and poisonous insects could be seen everywhere. Numerous magical creatures were hiding among them, waiting for the group to approach before attacking, but none of them could break through Professor Cheongsi's iron wall. The professors didn't even summon their magic elves. They were like adults wielding swords and axes as they charged in the direction pointed by Shirley at an unimaginable speed. Professor Shi-Erfu casually waved his hand and caused strong winds to swirl around. The group traveled with the wind at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they entered the secret place. 17 of 127. Good morning. O greater than over equal to X. O. Writing block, hand pain, discomfort. Chapter 6:15. Is this the place? Professor Shi-Erfu tapped his magic wand lightly, and a cool breeze swirled and carried everyone to the ground. Claire Kate casually took out a magic card, moved her lips, and drew a circle of light with her as the center, instantly spreading out and disappearing in the blink of an eye. The originally noisy sound of insects and beasts quieted down in an instant. Professor Cheongsi strode forward and came in front of a towering tree and slapped the tree trunk with his palm. Bang! With a loud bang, the giant tree actually began to shake with creaking sounds. At the place where his palm landed, the bark instantly split open, revealing the tree hole that was hidden within. A tree hole. Professor Cheongsi couldn't help but smile. Dake looked at the dark tree hole curiously and asked Cub Bear next to him, "Is this the tree hole?" Cub Bear stared at the tree hole for a long time and stiffly raised the photocopy in his hand. The words gradually appeared on it. "It's a tree hole, but it's not my tree hole." According to the previous description, the hidden room it originally lived in was located under a tree hole, and after entering the tree hole, it had to go through an underground tunnel to reach its hidden room. And as the guardian of the hidden room, as long as it was still on the same level, it could sense the location of the hidden room no matter how far away it was. This was also the reason why it could bring Dake and the others here. However, the current situation was that it could clearly sense the hidden room, but this tree hole was no longer the same tree hole as before. It can only be explained that although the external environment has been refreshed, the hidden room inside has not changed. There are many reasons for this situation, and the most likely is that there is an elite monster left in the hidden room. In other words, someone has occupied your nest. Dake quickly analyzed. Cub Bear suddenly pouted. But Professor Shi-Erfu looked at Dake with appreciation and said, "Good analysis. This is good news for us, because it means that at least we won't return empty-handed." Claire continued, "Perhaps the elite monster that took over the nest will become the breakthrough point. Professor Cheongsi, please go easy on him." Professor Cheongsi waved his hand and said, "I know my limits." After that, she directly went into the tree hole and took the lead to explore inside. Professor Shi-Erfu quickly reminded him, "Pawa, slow down." Claire shook her head and said, "You guys go first. I'll stay behind." Then she leaned back and let Dake and the others go first. Dake took a light breath, picked up Cub Bear by his feet, and followed him. Lily, on the other hand, flapped her wings and followed behind him with a relaxed expression. Professor Nini put Professor Ka Zaire on her shoulder and followed behind Professor Li Li. Claire walked at the back, and at some point, there was a monkey beside her. There was no danger in the tree hole. 8 people and 1 bear. Their journey was unimpeded. Not long after, the entrance to the hidden room appeared in front of them. Only then did Professor Jones slow down and reveal a cautious look. Although Cub Bear lived underground, it was very spacious. There were many rooms, and the bedroom in the deepest part was where the treasure chest was. According to Deanna and the others, there were monsters in every room. They had to defeat these monsters to continue to move forward and reach the end. But in fact, these monsters were temporarily born by the mechanism of the underground city. Just like now, when Professor Cheongsi stepped into the room, the ceiling of the room suddenly rippled like water waves. Monsters that looked like wet clay fell from the ceiling and quickly condensed after falling to the ground, turning into earth elemental monsters with different appearances. Some of these earth elemental monsters were rock elemental monsters, while some were ground elemental monsters. They looked ferocious, with scarlet eyes and endless malice. Professor Cheong-si frowned slightly. Perhaps she didn't want to be dirted by the mud, so she took out a magic card and summoned it on the spot. Her lips moved, but she didn't make a sound. The magic card in her hand was shining, and a beast that looked like a lion or a tiger came out of the magic card. It then pounced on the monster at the front like a gust of wind. Warlord Liger Beast. A mere 3-star magic guide sprite. It was Dake's first time seeing Professor Cheong-si summon this magic fairy, and he couldn't help but feel surprised. Warlord Liger Beast was a super rare magic fairy among the 3 stars. It had a strong core that could transcend levels, and it was a model of getting stronger as it fought. Roar! After a roar, the nearest monster was torn apart by the Warlord Liger Beast. It then raised its head slightly, and its whole body expanded visibly. Its 3 attributes also increased with its body size, and its aura became more ferocious. Then, the Warlord Liger Beast pounced on the second and third monsters like lightning. When all the monsters in the field were killed, it was already a huge beast that was 3 to 4 meters tall. Its strength had even surpassed the second tier, reaching the third tier. What's the limit of this Warlord Liger Beast? Dake couldn't help but ask. 9 stars. Lily flew to his side and said, specifically its magic attack and defense can reach a maximum of 4,500. Dake then said, a 3-star magic fairy can reach the strength of 9 stars. It's already very scary. Lily giggled and said, that's not all. When the Warlord Liger Beast reaches its limit, it can also trigger the fusion factor. 2 or 3 of them can fuse into a 2-headed Liger Beast, or a 3-headed Liger Beast. That's a genuine 4th-tier magic fairy. Dake couldn't help but say, this isn't mentioned in the books. Lily tilted her head and said, of course this is Pawa's secret skill. You should watch more and learn more. As professors, we are very impressive. Dake said, indeed it's amazing. Lily tilted her head even higher. With the Warlord Liger Beast paving the way, the monsters on the 11th floor were almost no threat. They quickly crossed the entire hidden room and came to the deepest part. The bedroom? Woo-woo. As soon as Cub Bear entered the room, it opened its eyes wide and looked at the dazzling array of treasures in the corner. If there was anything in this dungeon that it couldn't bear to part with, it would be these treasures. They weren't in this hidden room from the beginning. They were collected bit by bit after it revived as a parasite. As for the treasure chest in the room, it was naturally the crystal necklace in Luoxi's hands. However, compared to that necklace, Cub Bear clearly cared more about the fragments it had collected. At that time, as a prisoner, it couldn't bring these treasures out. But now as a prisoner it was fine. Cub Bear's little face suddenly shrank. Just as it was vexed over this, it suddenly heard an ear-piercing sound that sounded like tearing silk. Immediately after, the air in the entire room seemed to have frozen. It suddenly looked up and noticed that the half-elf named Sarah Shi-Erfu was floating in the air. Her light golden long hair moved without wind, and a strange cyclone suddenly appeared around her hands. The wind blew in an instant. However, other than Professor Shi-Erfu himself, no one else was blown by the wind. Other than Cub Bear, everyone else had a natural expression on their faces. The dark shadow in the corner of the room suddenly wriggled in this situation. Squeak! A sharp scream suddenly rang out. A sharp nose and mouth appeared in the corner of the shadow. A rat-like monster was forcibly dragged out of the shadow. We meet again. After a short moment of surprise, Dake smiled. He had a deep impression of this rat-like monster. Although he didn't know when he first saw it, after learning about Cub Bear's existence, he knew that this rat-like monster was the same kind of existence that had awakened its own self. And judging from its actions, it should have a deeper and more thorough understanding of the situation than Cub Bear. It was just that the underground city was so big that it was almost impossible to find such a monster. Who would have thought that after searching high and low for it, it would be so easy to find it? It hid in the shadow, and its breath was completely hidden, but it still couldn't escape the perception of the professors. Professor Shi-Erfu only used a little force to forcibly pull it out of the shadow. After a while, the rat-like monster was tied up by layers of wind chains and suspended in the air, unable to move. Professor Shi carefully looked at it and suddenly said, "Is this the rat you mentioned?" Dake nodded and said, "It should be unless it has a twin brother." Professor Shi smiled and said, "It seems that we are lucky." Osbrook was just a rat. Even before it became a monster, it was still a rat. But at that time, it belonged to the Demon King's army, and it was the terrifying Plague Lord. The plague it spread not only caused great panic in the human countries, but also affected the demon territory. Countless demon territory people died because of it, and the fear it spread to every corner of the world. But now it was just a rat. It was once the boss of the first level, Shadow Demon Rat. Without the ability to control the plague, OSS Brook could only drag out an ignoble existence in the shadow. It lost all its glory and was no longer feared by people. Even the students who appeared in the boss room at that time dared to kill it. It was angry, it was sad, and it wanted to tear those students who despised the Plague Lord, one by one. Then OSS Brook became a deserter. Snakes had their own ways, and rats had their own ways. After OSS Brook escaped, he gradually understood that he was resurrected in the Shungmalian Academy's underground city. Although it was a level boss, it was only the first level boss. If it went a little deeper, it would encounter powerful monsters that it couldn't handle. It was chased by monsters, hiding from the sight of the students, and finally, after a crisis, it awakened a new killing skill that made it an extremely rare shuttle, which could shuttle between the levels of the underground city. Because of this, OSS Brook was chosen by Abyss and became a stealth walker in the underground city. It was responsible for observing and discovering new members. This time, OSS Brook's target was Shirley Augustine, a parasite living in the body of a small bear. Shirley Augustine had been around for a long time, but because it was only an elite monster, it was never taken seriously. But in recent years, things happened frequently, and the organization thought that there was a possibility that their information could be leaked. A crisis was coming. So, OSS Brook was ordered to recruit people, whether good or bad, and expand the organization's strength as fast as possible to fight against the coming crisis. So, OSS Brook came here. OSS Brook's heart was full of fear, and his bean-sized eyes stared at the golden-haired boy who left a deep impression on him. Out of the corner of his eyes, he inadvertently glanced at the bear cub at the boy's feet. At that moment, he seemed to understand. "Traitor!" OSS Brook roared in his heart. He didn't dare to say it out loud, for fear of angering the traitor. Although he didn't recruit the bear cub into the organization, he instinctively felt that everyone was a monster and should be on the same side. Shirley Augustine's behavior was a betrayal to all the monsters in the underground city. All kinds of subtle emotions were vividly displayed on the mouse's face. Dake's heart moved, and he said to the bear cub, "It seems that it knows you." The bear cub hurriedly shook its head like a rattledrum, raised the photocopy and said, "But I don't know it, I don't know it, I don't know it at all." At this time, it was necessary to firmly draw a line with all monsters. Moreover, it really didn't know it. Professor Shi looked back at it and said, "Kazair, suppression lock." Kazair nodded slightly, took out the dungeon storage box, summoned a magic ring beside him, and reached his hand into it. When he retracted his hand, there was a jade ring the size of a bracelet in his hand. It was different from the suppression lock given to Dake. He took out one suppression lock instead of a pair. He threw the suppression lock to Shi put it on the mouse monster's head. OSS Brook wanted to struggle, but the suppression lock suddenly tightened and firmly clamped his head like a tight band. Then he suddenly found that the flow of magic in his body was completely frozen, and he couldn't even mobilize a trace of it. This made him feel worse. "Can you speak?" Professor Shi tapped the magic wand on OSS Brook's forehead, and a clear voice directly entered his brain, translated into several languages that he could understand. OSS Brook felt as if he had heard static repeated many times at once, and his head suddenly swelled with pain. The next moment, he felt as if he was being stared at by a ferocious beast, and he felt a chill from the depths of his soul. He turned his head stiffly and saw Pawa Cheong-si, professor from the Shungmalian Academy. Of course, the professors would also enter the dungeon, and a few of them were regulars. Pawa Cheongsi was one of them. In the Abyss organization, the portraits of these professors had been circulating, but OSS Brook was very lucky. His sharp sense of smell helped him to avoid danger time and time again, and he had never met these professors face to face. Therefore, this was the first time. Perhaps it was also the last time. Before he met them, OSS Brook was actually quite disdainful. Those stupid monsters in the organization who had seen these professors were always talking about how powerful these professors were, and they were extremely exaggerated, saying that they were as terrifying as the Demon King. As a former Plague Lord, OSS Brook thought that he had seen a lot, and he only thought that those monsters were covering up his failure and cowardice. Until the moment he really faced them, he suddenly realized that those monsters were not lying. He was even more frightened, and even his mouth started to tremble. Then he said in an extremely humble tone, "Of course, beautiful and noble elven lady. Those half-blood half-elven women like to be mistaken as elves," and even in his fear, OSS Brook did not forget his little thoughts. But after Professor Shi Erfu confirmed that he could speak, he stepped back slightly and left the rest to Ka Zaire. Professor Ka Zaire slowly walked over and asked curiously, "Shadow Rat? Do you have a name?" OSS Brook was tied up in the wind, and only his mouth could move. "Yes, Mr. Wise Goblin, you can call me Brook. I'm just a dungeon rat that accidentally gained intelligence. But if you need help, I'll do my best." "Oh." Professor Ka Zaire suddenly laughed. Then, while OSS Brook was completely unprepared, he suddenly said, "Where is the abyss?" OSS Brook felt like his throat was being strangled at this moment, and large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He had no idea how these professors knew about the abyss. Could it be that the parasite betrayed them again? But he clearly had not contacted the parasite yet. Could it be that another stealth walker had beaten him to it? Stealth walker? Professor Ka Zaire's next words were like a heavy hammer that directly hit his heart. OSS Brook instantly understood that he was facing a person who could read his mind. It was not the kind of trick that played with people's minds, but the real thing. Professor Ka Zaire had the power to see through people's minds. Eye of Truth. Door of Truth. It seemed normal to add on a mind-reading ability. Dake was not too surprised. He just sighed in his heart. Professor Ka Zaire was really a virtuous and noble person. It was his good fortune to have such a professor. With Professor Ka Zaire around, OSS Brook's lies were meaningless. Ka Zaire said calmly, "Don't worry, the Plague Lord is already dead." This sentence calmed off Brook down. Along with Professor Cheongsi's deterrence, he quickly surrendered and told Cheongsi everything he knew. Although Brook's memories came from the famous Plague Lord, it didn't change the fact that he was just a shadow rat. Unless he dared to commit suicide and bet on the next dungeon reincarnation, he would have a chance to change his situation. But not all monsters were as lucky as Bear Cub Shirley Augustine. Most monsters, even if they awakened, would fall back into chaos after death. The Abyss organization that OSS Brook belonged to called it, Return to the Abyss. In the Abyss organization that worshipped power, OSS Brook, as a shadow rat, could only be at the bottom and could not access the core secrets. But he was still a stealth walker. Even if he heard rumors, he still knew a lot. And this information was enough to surprise Dake and the others. Even though he had some guesses before, after confirming it, Professor Shi Erfu's face was still serious. When monsters awakened, it meant that they had the possibility to communicate with each other. And once they could communicate, they would form a community. The appearance of a monster organization was inevitable. But Shi Erfu still did not expect that there would be such a huge organization in the dungeon of the academy. According to OSS Brook, there were at least 100 members in Abyss. There were a total of 100 boss-tier monsters. And there were even bosses below the 100th floor. But this was not the main point. After Professor Ka Zaire thought about it, he asked, "Brook, do you know how you recovered your memory and awakened?" OSS Brook took a deep breath and said, "The answer to this question is what we have been looking for. According to the higher-ups of the organization, the Abyss is guiding us. But of course, we will not be bewitched by such words. I am afraid that only the higher-ups of the organization know the real core secret. Then what is the purpose of your recruitment? Professor Kazair asked again. But OSS Brooke shook his head and said, I don't know. I used to think that it was to counterattack the surface. But later I found that the higher-ups of the organization did not have this idea at all. I used to be angry about it, but now it has faded. As he said that, he raised his head and quietly glanced at the professors. He suddenly understood the behavior of the higher-ups of the organization. In the face of these monsters that were like the Demon King, anyone would lose the idea of resisting, right? No wonder the higher-ups of the organization had been restraining the members from attacking human students. It seems that the leader of your organization is very rational. Professor Kazair nodded and said, maybe there is a possibility of friendly communication between us. As a professor who loved peace, Kazair obviously did not like to use violence to solve problems. He then said, then, who is the leader of your organization? Who is the core of the organization? Tell me everything you know. OSS Brooke knew that he could not resist, so he slowly said it. From top to bottom, the Abyss organization was divided into leader, advisor, captain, and executor. OSS Brooke was the hidden walker of the executor. The executor was under the jurisdiction of the captain. There were a total of 8 captains, and each team had at least 10 executors. OSS Brooke's captain was a Night Crow King, which was the boss of the 67th floor of the dungeon. As soon as he finished speaking, Professor Shierfu said in a low voice, it is the Night Crow King? I remember that there was a batch of students who were completely annihilated when fighting the Night Crow King, and they were all teleported to the infirmary. Later on, there were people who went to challenge the Night Crow King, but they couldn't find the coordinates of the boss room. So this was the reason. OSS Brooke said humbly, the Night Crow King is cunning and sinister by nature. If you want to come into contact with it, it is best. Kazair asked curiously, you want it to die? OSS Brooke immediately shut his mouth. Professor Kazair shook his head slightly and said, continue. What kind of monsters are your leader, advisor, and captain? Who are their memories from? OSS Brooke said, they rarely talk about their past, and it is even more impossible for them to talk to an executor, like me. However, other than the leader, I can tell what kind of monsters they are. Professor Kazair nodded and said, then let's start with the advisor. OSS Brooke immediately said, the advisor of Abyss is a fog demon. It often transforms into a female human form, but no one knows what kind it is. Among the 8 captains, other than the Night Crow King of the 8th team, there is Red-Eyed Dragon Demon, 8 Treasure Spider Woman, Ice Emperor Bird. Half an hour later, Othbrook finally finished telling them everything he knew. The base of Abyss was located on the 99th floor of the underground city. The lower the floor of the underground city, the larger the area. The 99th floor was already extremely vast. It was also very quiet. Basically, other than breaking the record to defeat the boss, no students would venture into such a deep area. However, the Shung Malian Academy had existed for so many years, and the record for defeating a boss was still at the 89th floor. It didn't even break through the 90th floor, let alone the 99th floor. However, in the past few years after the war, the professors would occasionally form a team to challenge the floors below the 100th floor during the holidays. The existence of the underground city was very important for the professors' strength to increase rapidly. What do we do next? Claire asked with great interest. Professor Shierfu turned to Kazair and said, Kazair. Professor Kazair nodded slightly and took out a rubber tube from the dungeon storage box. Then he pulled out the cork and placed it beside OSS Brooke's mouth. He said kindly, drink it. OSS Brooke looked at Professor Kazair with tears in his eyes. He said with a trembling voice, Mr. Gnome, I've already cooperated. It's not poison. Professor Kazair smiled and said, when you wake up next time you'll be reborn. OSS Brooke's tears fell like rain. He didn't have the restraint of a plague overlord at all. Kazair stuffed the rubber tube into OSS Brooke's mouth. Then he pressed OSS Brooke's chin and forced him to raise his head and swallow the potion. Gulp. The potion entered OSS Brooks' throat. OSS Brooks' eyes were filled with despair. Suddenly his limbs convulsed, and his eyes lost their light. Ka-Zayer waited until OSS Brooks stopped moving before he said to Professor Shi-Erfu, "It's done." Professor Shi-Erfu raised his wand and spun it slightly to retract the shackles of wind around OSS Brooks' body. Osbrook fell to the ground with a thud like a rag. Shirley Augustine shuddered violently when she saw OSS Brooke being treated in such a manner. Professor Ka-Zayer seemed to have sensed her fear. He turned around and said gently, "It's just a tube of slumber potion." Cubbear was shocked and instinctively grabbed Dake's trousers. Dake patted Cubbear's head and said, "Professor, what do you plan to do next? Go directly to the 99th floor?" "I want to." Professor Shi-Erfu looked regretful. "It's a pity that I don't have the key or crystal to the 99th floor. Pawa, Claire, what about you guys?" Professor Pawa Cheongsi shrugged and said, "I'm sorry, I only have the key to the 88th floor." Claire said helplessly, "Professor, when I was in the academy, I only managed to reach the 50th floor. Are all the students these days so good?" "Not really," Professor Shi-Erfu said. "It's just that in recent years, some students have been particularly outstanding. Ka-Zayer, do you have the key to the door?" Professor Ka-Zayer smiled and said, "I don't have the 99th floor, but I have the key to the 103rd floor. What about you?" Professor Shi-Erfu said helplessly, "Mine is the 108th floor." Professor Ka-Zayer said, "Then let's go directly to the 103rd floor. Mine is the crystal." Professor Shi-Erfu said decisively, "Okay, let's go back to the living room first." Therefore, the professors decided on the next step in a few words. Although Dake wanted to say something, he didn't know what to say. In the end, he just shut up and didn't say anything. Professor Shi-Erfu walked over and lowered his head, asking, "Shirley, do you want to stay here or go with us?" Cubbear secretly glanced at the big rat that looked like a piece of ragged cloth, and quickly raised the photocopy book. Together. Professor Shi-Erfu nodded slightly and said, "The things piled up in the corner are all yours, right?" Cubbear's eyes lit up and nodded like a chicken pecking rice. Professor Shi-Erfu waved his hand and stuffed the pile of things into his dungeon storage box. Then he clapped his hands and said, "Let's go back." Half an hour later, the group returned to the living room on the 11th floor. They looked relaxed and didn't look much different from when they entered. The only obvious change was the shadow magic rat that Professor Cheongsi was holding in his hand. Everyone confirmed the schedule again, and Ka-Zayer took out a door crystal and opened it on the spot. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the students entered the dungeon one after another. There was a group of 3 people in the living room on the 11th floor. The 3 of them suddenly saw the professors in the dungeon and were shocked. It was as if they suddenly saw the dean in the game and quickly greeted him. The professors nodded slightly and entered the portal one by one. When the portal closed like a whirlpool and disappeared completely, the 3 students heaved a sigh of relief and whispered to each other about the professor's intentions. Dake Dimming and the 2 monsters that followed the professors naturally attracted their attention. But no matter how they guessed, they couldn't guess the true intentions of the professors. The 103rd floor of the dungeon. The living room. "Professor, can I take some mana with me?" After Dake went through the portal, his eyes lit up as he stared at the mana marker in the living room on this floor. If he didn't take advantage of this opportunity, he might not have the chance to come to the 103rd floor for a long time. Whether it was to use it or to collect it, it was good to take some mana away. Professor Shi-Erfu naturally wouldn't refuse. "Let's take a break here." Dake immediately took out the mana collector and excitedly squeezed out the needle from the collector and started collecting mana. The mana marker on the 103rd floor of the dungeon was a white and fat seal. It was carved out of jade and looked very cute. Dake filled up all 20 slots of the mana collector and put it away as if it was a treasure. The professors had somehow summoned a set of tables and chairs and sat down to discuss. When Dake walked over and sat down, they were talking about the leader of the Abyss. "What do you think about the leader of the Abyss?" Professor Shi-Erfu was obviously trying to brainstorm ideas. Claire immediately said, I haven't been to the 100th floor of the dungeon. I don't have the right to speak, right? Okay, I don't either. Dake immediately shut his mouth. Then I also. Professor Nini mumbled timidly. You guys. Professor Shi-Erfu was rather helpless. Lily immediately laughed and said, let me say it, let me say it. Didn't that big rat say that the strong are respected in the organization? So the leader of the Abyss organization must be a boss above the 100th floor. Have you guys ever had a boss that slipped away? Professor Shi-Erfu slowly shook his head. Professor Cheongsi didn't say anything either. Professor Ka Zaire frowned slightly and said, I do have some ideas about this. But that was during our 3rd year at the academy. Do you still remember the Golden Mermaid's tears? Lily froze and frowned. Golden Mermaid, the legendary tear. What's the story behind it? Dake asked. Professor Ka Zaire sighed slightly and said, according to the legends, the first mermaids were the children of the god of the sea. They had hair and fish scales that were as bright as gold, so they were called the Golden Mermaid. The blood of the Golden Mermaid could revive the dead. Just one bite of their flesh could extend one's life by 100 years. Their tears could rejuvenate an old man and make him stay young forever. When he spoke up to this point, Dark suddenly understood. Professor Ka Zaire's tone was slightly downcast. Of course, in the end, legends were only legends. Let's not talk about this for now. Professor Shi-Erfu said sharply. You guys never talked about this before. Did you guys find the Golden Mermaid in the dungeon? Professor Ka Zaire nodded and said, the 120th floor of the dungeon, the boss, the Golden Mermaid. Professor Cheongsi immediately asked, did you guys fight it? Ka Zaire said, we successfully captured it alive. Professor Cheongsi said, I know that. After all, you guys needed the tears of the Golden Mermaid. And dead things don't cry. I mean, what happened in the end? Ka Zaire said quietly. After we confirmed that its tears didn't have the legendary effect, we left. Professor Cheongsi couldn't help but ask, you didn't kill it? How can you not kill it when you're fighting a boss? Professor Ka Zaire said helplessly. At that time, we were in a bad mood. Now that I think about it, we didn't even open the treasure chest in the boss room. Professor Cheongsi couldn't help but roll his eyes. Then he pointed at his chest and said, do you know what I'm feeling now? My chest is twitching. Dake took a look. It was indeed twitching. Lily Professor quickly said, it's been so long. It's just that we let a tier boss escape. No way, right? No way, right? Professor Shi-Erfu couldn't help but cover his head. When a boss was first born, it would basically sleep in the boss room until someone stepped in. Perhaps it would develop consciousness in its sleep, but it would only be in a dream and would never wake up. When the door of the boss room was opened, it would be the time for them to truly open their eyes. Other bosses might be awakened by monsters that had awakened their consciousness, but the boss on the 120th floor of the dungeon, monsters would also die if they were killed. According to the information revealed by Oathbrook, the highest-ranked boss in the Abyss, including the strategist and the 8 captains, was a monster on the 82nd floor. Starting from the 101st floor of the dungeon, the difficulty would increase by another level. Even the boss monsters wouldn't dare to enter the dungeon below the 100th floor. In the Abyss, there was a rumor that the boss was a boss below the 100th floor. If this rumor was true, then the chances of the boss being the Golden Mermaid increased by a bit. The atmosphere in the living room gradually became weird. After a while, Professor Ka Zaire said, actually, I still have the door crystal on the 120th floor. Okay, Ka Zaire, I'm not blaming you. Professor Sylph sighed and said, even the reason why the Abyss organization is so orderly today is mostly because of the leader. I'm not saying that the chief of Abyss has to be a Golden Mermaid. Sai, just tell me what a Golden Mermaid looks like. Is it easy to communicate with her? Once it has its own consciousness, it's no longer a monster. Using force is the last resort. Professor Shi-Erfu's meaning was very clear. However, Professor Ka Zaire looked away when he heard her question. Professor Shi-Erfu froze and turned to Lili, only to see Lili looking up at the ceiling and whistling. Professor Shi-Erfu suddenly had an ominous feeling in his heart. Don't tell me you guys have done something really bad? Seeing the awkward atmosphere, Professor Cheongsi knocked on the table and said, "Okay, Sarah. They want the tears of the Golden Mermaid." It's not easy to make the Golden Mermaid cry, so they have to do something. 18/127. I've been writing for a long time. I've used up 2 leave requests. Finally, it's done. Damn it, and I? Don't be stuck anymore. O greater than over equal to X, O. Chapter 616. Professor Shi Erfu was silent for a long time, and agreed with Professor Cheongsi's words. Monsters didn't have self-awareness and lacked self-awareness. It was almost impossible to make them shed tears naturally. Ka Zayer and the rest didn't know that monsters could develop self-awareness. They must have used some special means. She thought for a while and decided not to mention it. But after a slight hesitation, Professor Kaiser said, "As far as we are concerned, the process of the monster's self-awakening is also gradual. They don't become complete in an instant. Instead, they gradually perfect themselves with the influx of memories. We didn't see any self-awareness from the Golden Mermaid, so we couldn't confirm if it had awakened. Therefore, I can't answer your question." Professor Shi Erfu frowned and thought that it was true. Ka Zayer continued, "But we can analyze it from another direction. That shadow fiend rat's memories came from Plague Lord Othbrook. No matter what its temperament was at the beginning, after the memories flowed in, it gradually perfected itself, making it almost the same as the Plague Lord. As for Little Bear, as a parasitic spirit, it awakened when it was still the Ice Maiden. Its memories came from the Ice Maiden, Shirley Augustine. Even if it reincarnated as a parasitic spirit, it still retained the personality of Shirley Augustine. Their similarity is that they were all bosses at the beginning of their awakening. The bosses in the dungeon were originally the manifestations of these famous historical figures. Shadow Fiend Rat is like this, Ice Maiden is like this, and so will Golden Mermaid. In other words, as long as we find the Golden Mermaid that left an important footprint in history, we can deduce the identity of the Golden Mermaid and reverse engineer its personality. The Golden Mermaid didn't have a large population like the Shadow Fiend Rat. They were rare, and they were respected as the descendants of the sea god. They rarely left the seabed. Therefore, there shouldn't be many Golden Mermaids that left an important footprint in history. In my memory, there are only 2 Golden Mermaids that fit the criteria. The first one is the High Priest of the Sea Clan who once summoned a whirlpool hurricane to mince the Sea Clan's navy that invaded the Sea Clan. The other one is a princess of the Sea Tribe whose tragic love story has been passed down since ancient times. It is also said that the tears of the Golden Mermaid can restore one's youth and preserve one's youth forever. But these 2 are different from the Golden Mermaid boss that I saw. Do you have any other clues? The professors pondered over Professor Ka Zayer's explanation. After a while, Professor Shi Erfu said, "Have you heard of the Witch of the Sea?" Claire asked casually. "The legendary witch who often appears in storms and thunderstorms to guide the ship's course." Professor Shi Erfu nodded and said, "I grew up in the coastal area. When I was very young, I heard of the legend of the Witch of the Sea. When sailors went out to sea, they would often wear shells with the name of the Witch of the Sea engraved on them to pray for their safe return. Later, I investigated whether the Witch of the Sea really existed. Although I didn't go too deep into it, if I guess correctly, it should be a mermaid. I just don't know if it is the Golden Mermaid." "Now that you mention this, I suddenly remembered," Professor Cheongsi said. "In the Southern Sea, there is also a legend about mermaids. They are called the Light of Dawn. It is said that they come with the morning glow and bring the sea fish, pearls, and love to the coastal residents." The professors expressed their opinions, and Dake occasionally chimed in. As they spoke, they suddenly realized that there were so many legends about mermaids. What was even more uncomfortable was that although they couldn't confirm whether the mermaids in the legends were the Golden Mermaids, they couldn't confirm whether they were the Golden Mermaids or not. In the end, Professor Shi Erfu could only conclude, "In short, most of the legends about mermaids are good. After all, they are the symbol of beauty and nobility among the sea tribe. They are not a threat to humans on the mainland, so they have a relatively positive image from the beginning. But as Ka Zaire said before, legends are just legends. It is not reliable to infer whether a golden mermaid is good or bad. Claire smiled and said, "Then let's wait until we find one and understand it face to face." Professor Shirfa nodded and said, "It's almost time. Let's get ready to go." So everyone got up one after another and made the final preparations. Professor Shirfa said to Dake, "Next, we will go up from here to the 102nd floor. Then cross the entire stratum to reach the reception hall on the 102nd floor. If we go against the flow from the reception hall, there is a high probability that we will appear in the depths of the stratum, which is extremely dangerous. Moreover, it is below the 100th floor. Therefore, you must follow Lily closely." Dake took a deep breath and replied, "I will, Professor Shirfu." Then Professor Shirfu looked at Lily. Lily hurriedly grabbed Dake's arm and said seriously, "Of course I will, right?" Professor Shirfu shook his head and said seriously, "Summon your magic guide sprites. I don't want any accidents to happen." Lily. Out of caution, the professors began to summon their magic guide sprites on the spot. They either used special summoning methods or directly sacrificed their sprites. Except for Professor Nini, every professor summoned a 4th-tier magic guide sprite. In normal life, it was almost impossible to see a 4th-tier magic guide sprite unless it was a duel between the top contestants. Dake was very curious about the professor's magic guide sprites and couldn't help but pay more attention to them. Professor Shirfu acted the quickest and was the first to summon a 4th-tier magic guide sprite. When the 4th-tier magic guide sprite appeared in the wind, Dake couldn't help but be shocked. He had thought about what type of magic guide sprite Professor Shirfu would summon, but he didn't expect her to summon a golden-haired sprite that looked exactly like her. The elven magic guide sprite had bare feet that were as white as jade, and a cool breeze flowed around its body, emitting a greenish-white light. It was wearing the traditional elven clothing, and its chest was smaller than Professor Shirfu's, but it was still like a mountain range. Its long hair was exactly the same as her, a faint golden color that swayed with the wind. The long ears that protruded from the golden hair were even longer than her, closer to that of a pure-blooded elf. There was a green wind rune shining between its eyebrows. Apart from its ears, its facial features were exactly the same as the elven sprite. However, its demeanor and aura were undoubtedly much gentler, and it gave off a gentle and delicate feeling. It looked like a gentler version of Professor Shirfu's pure-blooded elf. Dake was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, Professor Lily whispered into his ear and giggled. "Do you want to know what Sarah's magic guide sprite is?" Dake said instinctively, "Yes." Lily pulled his arm and shook it, then whispered into his ear. "That's Wind Sprite King, Shirfu." Shirfu? Dake couldn't help but be surprised. The Wind Sprite King was naturally the king of the wind sprites, and it had the authority to control the wind sprites. Of course, as a magic guide sprite card, the Wind Sprite King was just a clone, and its authority was limited. However, this wasn't important. What was important was its name. The name of this magic guide sprite card was actually the same as Professor Shirfu's surname. Seeing the surprise in his eyes, Lily said proudly, "Do you think that, Wind Sprite King, Shirfu looks exactly like Sarah?" Actually, it's not that. Wind Sprite King, Shirfu, looks like Sarah, but it's the other way around. Sarah and Wind Sprite King, Shirfu look alike. Of course, I'm talking about the real Wind Sprite King, Shirfu. Lily. Shirfu suddenly turned around and glared at her. Professor Lily stuck out her tongue and hurriedly began to summon her magic guide sprite. Dake, on the other hand, was deep in thought. He knew that Professor Shirfu's father was a pure-blooded elf, and he was now running a tavern in Traveler's Street. However, other than that, his knowledge was limited. Since Professor Shirfu was a half-elf, then the other half of his bloodline definitely didn't come from a pure-blooded elf. So, Dake instinctively thought that Professor Shirfu was a hybrid between a pure-blooded elf and a human. However, that wasn't the case. How could an elf and a human give birth to a hybrid that looked exactly like the Wind Sprite King? He realized that he had taken it for granted. Meow. Suddenly, a huge tongue hung down from above and licked his face. He hurriedly took 2 steps back and saw the magic guide sprite that Professor Lily had summoned. It was a strange-looking long-necked dragon. It looked strange because it had the head of a cat, the wings of a dragonfly, the 4 limbs of a turtle, the tail of a dolphin, and 2 dragon horns on its head. Dake had never seen such a strange creature. Even the legendary David's deer wasn't as strange as this. However, this magic guide sprite seemed to have a good impression of him. It meowed and licked his body. "Stop it." Lily patted the magic guide sprite's head and stopped it. Dake couldn't help but ask, "What kind of magic guide sprite is this?" Lily flew down and said proudly, "You've never seen it before, right? This is a magic guide sprite that only Lily has. Fantasy Fairy Dragon." Fantasy Fairy Dragon? Dake tried to reach out his hand, and the Fantasy Fairy Dragon lowered its round head and let him touch it to his heart's content. This Fantasy Fairy Dragon didn't have the aura of a 4th-rank dragon species. However, whether it was strong or not, it was still a 4th-rank one. Dake couldn't guess, so he could only look at the other professor's magic guide sprites for the time being. Claire aside, the 4th-rank magic guide sprite that Professor Pawa Cheongsi had summoned was, as expected, a giant bear. When the giant bear was first summoned, it was 15 to 16 meters tall, like a building. Its body was covered in layers of rock armor, and its tail was like a dragon's tail that supported its majestic body. Dake had seen information about this magic guide sprite in a book. This was a rock armor giant bear, a bird species that was of the earth/rock type. As long as it stood on the ground, it could absorb the power of the earth to rapidly heal itself. There was nothing special about the rock armor giant bear. It was purely strong. Its strength was extremely terrifying, and it could tear the earth apart with one claw. However, Dake had just blinked when he realized that Professor Cheongsi had activated another magic guide card, and the rock armor giant bear shrunk to a height of 3 meters at a speed visible to the naked eye. Magic spell card. Shrink. It was the complete opposite of the other magic spell card. Enlarge. Shrink would shrink the magic guide sprite's body and reduce its attack coefficient while increasing its defense coefficient by the same amount. After the rock armor giant bear shrunk, its defense almost doubled. Coupled with its high-speed self-healing ability, it was simply an unbreakable iron shield. After Professor Cheongsi, Claire had finally summoned her own magic guide sprite. Dake had thought that she might summon the rather handsome white tiger, but she had chosen an extraordinarily lazy fat lion. Regardless of whether it was the lion or the tiger, they were all kept sparsely in Claire's bedroom. If he hadn't seen with his own eyes that she had to sacrifice 3 times before summoning it, he wouldn't have thought that this fat lion that he often kicked around was actually a 4th-tier magic guide sprite. Phew, the fat lion that was summoned lay down lazily at Claire's feet. Time to work. Claire used her foot to push the fat lion's belly, and it finally moved, changing its position and continuing to lie down. Dake couldn't imagine what kind of magic guide sprite this ordinary-looking fat lion could be, so he could only ask Lily, who was beside him. Lily had an I know look as he said, "Dust Lion, have you heard of it?" Dake's heart skipped a beat, and only then did he remember a little bit. Dust Lion was a type of magical animal in the natural world. They were born from dust, and were the same type of species as the Dust Sprite, that was like a coal ball. However, Dust Lion and Dust Sprite were like dragons and ants. They weren't on the same level at all. The only similarity was that both could absorb dust and clean the room. Then what about Professor Ka-Zayer's magic guide sprite? Dake turned to the 4th-tier magic guide sprite that Professor Ka-Zayer had summoned and asked in a low voice again. In front of Professor Ka-Zayer, there was a magic guide sprite that was as tall as a person emerging from the viscous liquid. The magic guide sprite had comma-like limbs, and its head and body were shaped like a plate. However, from the outside, it looked like a plate of jelly, and there was even liquid flowing inside. Dake had to admit that he had never seen such a magic guide sprite before. Good morning, 3. That you're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.